All right. Hello, hello, hello. If you can see us, if you can hear us, please let us know. It's another lovely, hopefully lovely, depending on how your day is going, Sunday in the world. I totally was not kept up late because of the joys of, I think it was heartburn. I don't know. It was weird. But nonetheless, I'm here. I'm
Never
alive.
good. On my side, approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, I just got pretty much filled with the urge to write up an entire little skit for Borkbark, pardon me, the god of lawyers in Warhammer. And today, before this stream, I wrote that. So I'm going to probably be posting that up on my blog sometime later on this afternoon because Borkbach was... Well, yeah, I've already written. I've written the whole thing. I've written a career. I've written spells. I've done the whole thing. I was literally filled with the need to do it because somebody mentioned it over on Discord. And somebody said, anyone heard of this god? Does anyone have any ideas for it? And I just immediately went, oh, this. I was suddenly filled with a need to write it out properly because I originally created Borkbach for the Tome of Salvation a long time ago. So I have now created an entire thing. So that's going to be popping up over on the Patreon blog later on today. So there you go.
A mighty need.
Yeah, this is a fine example of how I prepare for Lorebeards. What do? I write about something else. Yeah, never the wisest way.
But hopefully you're all doing really, really well. It's been pretty decent week, I would say overall. I needed to ask because I wasn't 100% sure. Was there Lawhammer this week, or did y'all end up taking this week off?
We took this week off. We had a bit of a chat behind the scenes, and we would eventually decide to take it off. So we slapped up a couple of the pre-recorded episodes. They are up.
So I do have something to do this evening. Great.
Yes, you do. There is indeed an episode for you up there. It's a relatively short one, but this one is proper bonks because it suggests that there is a bajillion winds of magic and it's good fun.
Oh, that's gonna be super duper enjoyable.
Yeah.
I still it was really funny when Elric got that new talent, and it was like there was a part of me that's like, I feel like a part of him is gonna regret this.
Oh yeah, it's a thing, and yeah, it's in response to that because one of our characters picked up a talent that allows him to see all magic, and it's going pretty bonkers for him. Good
Excellent.
Times.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and hop into the super chats that came in early, and then we'll get into the intro, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun episode today because we are talking about a subject that is much discussed on many a platform and in many different ways. The good old Fimir, the bog demons. So if you have any chats in, let's get through those fast. And if they are, as we've said before, going to be discussing things we're going to discuss later, we'll just say we'll discuss that later.
Captain Magma will be late today. Wanted to ask if you guys saw any discussion on Fimir in the Lawhammer Discord Lorebeards channel this past December. Some good ideas on how to make Fimir a less problematic race came up. So that is something we're going to discuss pretty heavily on today's stream, especially once we get into the intro and stuff. But I did not, I think, notice that particular conversation as a very wonderful thing. The Lawhammer Discord is a busy place. But sometimes that means when you miss something, it's gone.
It's one of the reasons that I set up the threads so that people could set up, the individual forum places so people could set up their own little bits that hopefully wouldn't vanish because Discord is just known for streaming by your screen.
Also, Jake Christie, thank you very much for the 32 months over on Twitch. It's been a turbulent last couple of months due to college, but I can finally catch a stream. Also, 4 months away from 3 years, which is wild. Yeah, time unfortunately does that thing where it just kind of keeps on keeping on. Charles CK, what's like the average size of Fimir? I've seen models in art which makes them look everything from like human size to troll size. Source
That's
scale.
in my intro. I'll cover that in the intro because it's a surprisingly important part of their history, as you're about to find out.
Oh, well, I look forward to that then. I will give the very simple thing of that in the Total War era that we're currently in, they are seemingly all depicted as troll-sized, but we'll get into the history of that with Andy in just a little bit.
Yeah, there's a history.
Singemeister, all right, so here's my proposal. Fimir reproduction is a complex and laborious process relying on temperature, haploid, diploid, gamete splits, living incubators, and the winds of magic. 1 out of 8. I don't know when you say 1 out of 8 if you mean that there are 7 additional follow-up posts coming, or if that's like the first of 8 proposals, or well,
he's got a bunch of other posts sitting underneath 2 of 8, 3 of 8, 4 of 8. If anyone wants to go check them out, he's got a complete stream of posts sitting in the comments over on YouTube. So go check over on YouTube and you'll see his complete idea there with Fimir eggs and eel-like Fimpoles and all manner of cool ideas. So go check that out over in the comments.
Yeah, I like how he just skipped 3 of 8. That's very funny. Even 1 of 7. Okay, so yeah, make sure to read those out. Magladrop is completely unrelated, but there is a Fishman mod. Soon the DLC shall rise. Drums in the deep. Yeah, there is. And it's definitely on my to-do list to do. I think that's something we're gonna. That's something we're gonna check out this week. I also do want to take a brief moment to say that for anyone that listens to the stream and finds it particularly interesting and wants to check out an interpretation of the Fimir, OVN actually made a really, really impressive Fimir mod that not only took a lot of the stuff that is from, a mixture of like the modern and the older stuff. They also took a lot of the fan-made stuff, though very professionally well-done fan-made stuff from Warpstone Magazine, to expand the Fimir, and then they also added things like the Knuckle of V, which works really well as a Fimir monster. So do be sure to check that out if you haven't already. It's a super duper 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 great mod that has a lot of really interesting but fun interpretations, and they went pretty wild on it. Shadishian, I am Fimir on time for a change. Let's go. Oh, good to see you. Thanks for being here. WPKN, should new writers undergo a Warhammer lore / IRL history course before they start to work? How about taping them to a chair and making them watch Lorebeards?
So I have an actual answer to this. No, I don't think they should. But I do think that anyone that's developing the game, so for example, making, say, the Old World, or making Warhammer, or making Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, those developers definitely should spend time learning stuff, because it makes a significant difference for not just the quality of the products, because you'll have all manner of different sources being referenced, but it also means that when your products come out, they're far less likely to have idiots like us step forward and say, but didn't you read this book? So that's not required for the writers, because they don't need to do it. But the people who are editing that work, a far smaller point on the pyramid, for example, they definitely should at least have some idea of what they're doing. Games Workshop often fulfills that role, though, because they're the ones that effectively gatekeep their own intellectual property.
Yeah, I would very much agree that less people should need to do it, which is why having the editors do it is best. And B, it's easier to have
Since you said editors, it's not less people, it's fewer people.
Fewer people, there you go. Thank you, Andy.
It's countable, fewer.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's much easier to have someone who has a much better view on things that can provide specific like guidelines, and then when they're reading over it being like, oh, okay, we need to change this to say this instead, we can change this to say this instead, or maybe instead of this idea we run with this idea. And it also allows, because I would be worried about if you try and force writers to learn certain amounts of things, that they're going to feel constrained to not experiment and try new ideas, and you don't want that. You want them to try new things.
No, and it's not needed. For example, during Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, during that era, I was the IP guy. That means I was the person that knew Warhammer World backwards, forwards, and sideways. So whenever a new book came through, which was inevitably going to be filled with IP errors in that they'd done things differently, I did a pass on it and then sent it back and said, these are all the things that should change if you want to make sure you marry up with other books. But if you don't change it. It's their books. They weren't my books. And I did an editing pass on, I don't know, about 20 odd books or so. Quite a lot of them. I can't remember how many there were. There was a bunch, but I was brought on after the first spate of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 books came out, because the first spate were riddled with errors, riddled with small mistakes, and riddled with contradictions from other sources. And the fan base literally went wild. When I say what we were in an edition war, the edition war between second edition and first edition was so strong that the forums were pretty much on fire about everything that the new edition had done that was wrong. They were in a position where they just didn't want to have that fire being fanned anymore by their books. And I happened to be there. They knew me, and I just did a pass on every book from that point forwards. And then suddenly the fan dropped away, the flames dissipated, and we managed to have a more grown-up discussion about what the books were offering rather than just wailing at the sky that it wasn't Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition. So there's a thing.
Yep. Magdon44, do we know the particulars of the Fimir/Chaos deal? We'll talk about this when we get into them. There's been a couple of different interpretations about what that relationship looks like. Not as much as there should be. To be honest, it is vaguely, it's not as like well defined as the Dragon Ogres deal was, where the deal of the Dragon Ogres is kind of like a fundamental core that the rest of the race revolves around. The Fimir are not, it's not that specific on it, but we'll get into that because there is a story there, I think, that's worth exploring.
Yep, agreed.
And I fear mirror what's to come. Fair. Warzak's Murky Mischief, what caused the Fimir to fall from the God's grace? We'll get into that. Opinions on the Fimir mod, I think it's very good. I like it a lot. A lot of really wonderful love and care was put into it. There are aspects of it that I think should, if you were doing a full expansion on the Fimir, which I don't necessarily think will ever fully happen. I think they'll always kind of be tacked on to another race. There are some things in that mod that I would love to see made canon for the Fimir. Things like the Knuckle V summonable demons, or the Shrine of Balor, which we'll talk a little bit about the Balor whole thing in a bit, because it's from the older literature mainly, but it makes for a really, really cool concept. But it's good. I highly recommend playing it. Breaks Kid, a day dedicated to the old world army I'm painting. Fimir, my favorite fantasy race. Thanks, guys. You're welcome, and thanks for coming by. Also, I've seen some like absolutely amazing kit bashes, especially recently. There's someone I saw that made a Fimir matriarch model using the big hulking Ushoran model as the base. It looks incredible. I might actually bring that up at some point on stream. The giant boglars. Don't. I feel like that's very insulting to both species. poor little boglars. Super Arlock, your face has changed. Thank you for the support. Appreciate it. Spice, this conversation on Sotek's latest DLC speculation video got me wondering. Andy, would you say that Norska has become completely chaosified? If so, would you say that Norska distinction is redundant?
Definitely not. It's not chaosified. If anything, the most recent updates have made that very clear. The entirety of that peninsula has a complicated relationship with chaos. I think that would be a better way of putting it. But there are certainly entire sections of it which are not chaos leaning at all.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. I will still, I think, reiterate on a lot of my point that I said, because that video was super interesting. I almost want to do a whole discussion about that at some point. But I do think when you're looking at it from a perspective of like the total war game or the battle game, there are certain concessions that often have to be made, especially when you're dealing with work that's already been done. And I think the exploring the non-chaos aspects of Norska is extremely challenging from a Total War or tabletop perspective. And I'll leave it at that.
Easy for roleplay, though.
Oh yeah, roleplay. That is like the best thing possible. But then again, I would be super happy to see someone try and take on that challenge.
Yeah.
Necromancer Cobalt, can't wait to learn more about my precious horror babies. The Beastmen may be the black sheep of chaos, but Fimir might be more unloved, both canonically and real worldly. Debatable. Cobalt, I think the Dark Gods are lame for neglecting the Fimir because the Fimir are sick as hell. I love the Fimir. Don't worry, we'll talk about that and what might be the impetus behind that, because that is a core aspect of their identity back to their initial creation, which makes them something that I really, really, really enjoy, but we'll talk about that. Captain Old Hammond, wondering what your opinion as a Brit is, Andy, on this subject. Do you like the Ovian Owls?
A Scotsman, please.
Yeah, really.
But I'll take it. You know, I am in Great Britain.
Do you like the Ovian Albion mod? Do you think it correctly depicts your people?
My people.
There's a model that even looks like you.
That suggests a level of nationalism or national pride that I simply don't have. My people or the Celtic people. I can't say that I've seen the mod, so I could in no way make any judgment on this.
You know what? That might be a fun thing for me and Andy to do at some point, right? As opposed to our usual like trying to get through a campaign. Maybe one day we could mess around with exploring mods. That might be a fun thing. Ricky Chapman, during a Wolfram campaign, we were close allies with the Fimir. We raided parts of Kislev till Ostankia showed up. She slaughtered them. Only one survived. Poor Blog.
Oh well.
Blog is a delightful name for a Fimir friend. Also, y'all must have been some evil bastards if y'all were best friends with the Fimir raiding Kislev.
Yeah, wow. Well, I mean, that's a choice.
Yeah, y'all were up to shenanigans. Jez Hunt, who does the best Fimir art, and why is it Paul Bonner, plus the Alan Lee inspiring piece of the Fomorian?
Yeah, well, you know, everyone's going to have their own opinions. I'm actually going to be covering this a little bit in the intro as well, because it is worth dialing into an inspiration for the Fimir too. And yeah, Paul Bonner's art, I think, is my favorite, but that's because that's the art I grew up with. All his little army list entries and all the little shots of the Fimir doing various nasty close combat nonsense. That was very much my bag.
All right, and with that, it's intro
all right,
time.
we good to go?
Yes, and we're really good to go.
Okay. Right, before we begin, I have a couple of things to say. Number one, I actually really like this topic. I'd also really hate this topic for a variety of professional reasons, because this particular topic has been a bit of a problem for me in the past, and I didn't think it was going to be, and it has been. And the reason it was a problem for me is the very reason that many of you out there will already expect, and that's that there is a problematic part of the Fimir's construction, their write-up for their history, that has been focused upon and refocused upon and refocused upon again and again and again, which is what I'm going to bring up for my first very clear point. This is a potentially triggering stream. For those of you out there who have issues with sexual assault, with abduction, and various other things, we're going to be discussing what the Fimir used to be and what the Fimir might have become. This is going to be a part of this stream. So be aware of that before we head in. And if you've got any issues with that, this might be one you just might want to skip. Now, I imagine for many of you, you're just keen to know what I'm talking about. So let's go. I'd like to take you back in time, because I like to do that. Right to almost the beginning of Warhammer, but not the beginning of Warhammer per se, as in the battle game, because the first battle game was very much almost just stereotypical fantasy. Here's rules to play these armies play against each other. It wasn't the Warhammer world that we know and love today. But somebody decided that the Warhammer world should be a thing way, way, way back in the early days of Games Workshop. And this somebody, the one I'm going to call out at least for this stream, was Brian Ansell. Now, you might or might not have heard of Brian Ansell, but he used to own Games Workshop. He eventually sold it and bought an island, as you do. Brian Ansell was, for the early Games Workshop team, a controversial figure, because he changed Games Workshop completely. Not just moving it from London up to Nottingham, but very much moving the focus from all of the games that they did to selling miniatures and Warhammer. And one of his primary goals in that was to make Warhammer its own unique thing. He hired in writers to create new stories, the first Warhammer novels, in fact. He very much pushed people to create new, evocative things for Warhammer that weren't just copy-pastes of everything else, whether it was your elves, your dwarves, your orcs, the things that we all knew. And one of his desires was to create something for Warhammer that was unique to Warhammer, that you didn't get in all the other fantasy settings. And he gave it a go. And you might be thinking, so what? He made the Fimir? No, he did not. He created something completely different. He created the Zotes. Now, we haven't discussed the Zotes in any stream yet with any real let's say, wait, we're almost certain to do that at some point. So I won't go into any depth about the Zotes. But when I say that they were hated by most of the studio, they were hated. They looked at these somewhat ridiculous horsey, lizard, dragon turtle-y weirdos and went, no, these are stupid. These are just stupid. To which Brian Ansell said, well, fine. Well, fine. If you don't like them, make something better. And so they gave it a go. The team, in particular, that gave it a go was on writing, Graham Davis, on miniature design and art, Jez Goodwin, and over on art, in particular, Tony Ackland. And the three of them got together, and Graham sat down and beavered away at creating something new. Now, Graham is a good friend of mine. Graham's the best, and he and I have discussed this more than once, so I know this story pretty well. At least I know a version of the story that he retold me, and I heard again and again. But I haven't just heard it from Graham's side. I've also heard it from Tony Ackland's side, because I bought from Tony Ackland the very first piece of Fimir art that he did. Sadly, not here at the moment. It's away in storage. And during that process, I chatted to Tony as well about it and where it came from. He had a very similar origin story, not quite the same, but pretty similar. So let me take you back to those early ideas. Graham Davis is a great fan of the myths of the UK, Ireland, and indeed the British Isles as a whole. But not just that, just myths and legends across the world. And when he sat down and thought, you know what? I kind of want to make something that feels uniquely British, that feels uniquely new for Warhammer, that wasn't just copy-pasted for, say, D&D, or, as we all know, something like Elves and Dwarves from Tolkien, or Chaos from Michael Moorcock. They're just all lifts from somewhere else. And he had a little think. Now, he'd been tasked to effectively create something that was unique and as distinctive as, say, the Beholder from D&D. Now, admittedly, the Beholder was also copy-pasted from a toy that came from, I think, like Hong Kong or something, but that's by the by. It very much became
Nothing's
a thing
original
for D&D.
anymore.
The brew for RuneQuest were also, at that time, particularly strong. They were a unique species for RuneQuest, much like, say, ducks were, but let's just not get caught up in that. And he sat down and he went, you know what? I'm going to go to town with something that feels Celtic, something that really feels like it was made by a British company. And away he went, and he created what we now know as the Fimir. And he went to town on it. I mean, he really did. He didn't just create a single species. He created a relatively bulky, new, almost orc-like, in that they were sort of green and sallowy yellow, but also almost lizardine and amphibious, and maybe a little bit dinosaur too. And you might be a little bit surprised at the dinosaur aspect to it, but when he was slowly but surely putting them together, he drew from an ankylosaurus, a dinosaur, and gave them big clubbing tails. So paleontology is a strong reference for the Fimir that we have today, and he gave them all tails with bony spurs upon them. The main warrior ones were given big mace-like tails, and their nobles were given big wicked blades that sat on the end of their tails, and he loved it. For their overall look, he went to, well, the books that he had, and the books that he had a Fimir in it. Now, that make you go, wait, what? Well, the origin point of the Fimir is the Fomorians. Now, you might not have heard of the Fomorians. They are from Irish legend. You could say they're a little bit like, I mean, I've seen them equated to orcs in that they were this species that rose up and were put down, in this case in Irish legend, by the Tuatha De Danann. I've seen them equated to the Titans from Greek legend, and they had a big king. Their most famous king was Baelor One-Eye. And Baelor One-Eye, rather famously, led the Tuatha, well, not the Tuatha, pardon me, led the Fomorians to, well, not their eventual victory. And Alan Lee did a picture of a Fomorian. Now, you might have heard of Alan Lee from Lord of the Rings, because he did a lot of the Lord of the Rings movie art. And there's a picture, and in fact, I'll post it over in my Discord, just so that we have it somewhere. So I'm going to post that over in my Fimir conversation. I'm also posting another picture, the one that I own, over there. And there's a picture that Alan Lee did of a Fomorian. It's a Fimir. Now, he gave this picture over to, I believe it was Jez Goodwin, and said, here's what I'm thinking of, something like this. And Tony Ackland and Jez Goodwin went, excellent, copy, paste. And as Graham put it, I didn't expect them to be so literal with their copy pasting here. So I've posted that over on Discord for those of you who are on the Discord channel. If you're watching this much later over on Sotek's channels, do just pop over on Discord. Oh, excellent. Perfect. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
that's great.
That is pretty much just Fimir.
That's Alan Lee's one. There you go. That's a thing. That's a thing. That's a Fimir. And it was copy-pasted, tail and all. The lizardine nature of it was brought over completely. And this was our first designs getting put in place. And when Graham presented this to everyone went, hey, cool. And they started making the line. Jez Goodwin did the first test sculpt. And this is where things start going a little bit awry for what happens later on. Because the whole concept and the point of these Fimir was to create something that was effectively going to be a marketing sleigh. It was going to be the most awesome thing for Warhammer, and it was going to be a unique army that they could focus upon that was unlike anything else sold. A little bit like how the Skaven are often perceived, even though the concept of Ratmen were anything but new. But the Skaven are a relatively unique Warhammer species. Yes, that's the piece of art that I own. In fact, I own that one.
Yeah, if you go back and watch earlier episodes of Lorebeards, you could see it hanging behind
Amy. In the background, yeah. That was the first test piece by Tony Ackland when he was working out what they would look like. And they were like, yep, that's the one. Excellent. Love it. So, how awesome is that? That's great. We've got a new species. And Graham went to town designing an entire species. It was a matriarchal one, and it was enshrouded with horror and mist and darkness. They loathed sunlight. The magical mist that they would gather around them, they used to protect as their armies went to war. They were effectively innately magical. They had demonic blood. This wasn't exactly explained with any great detail. It just simply was the case. They had their single large eye and a beak-like head. They were lizardine in nature. They had fangs. They had their big barbed tails. And they were matriarchal, which very much pulls on many of the older myths. And they were led by matriarchal, like hag witches, really, called Mirgas. And the Mirgas were the only females they had. They also had priests who were called Dirachs. They'll later be called things like Balefiends. They had nobles called the Fianna, very, very Irish. We had the basic warriors with their club-like tails called the Fim. And then he created a bunch of basic lowly peasants, worker types called the Sherrills. And that was our Fimir. They got themselves a bunch of uniquely, almost primitive equipment, all blood and bronze, talismans, and almost stone-like with some of them and how they were presented. And away they went from the mists into the Warhammer world. And to begin with, they were relatively popular. They were first properly given a full write-up in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, where, interestingly enough, the Zotes also arrived too. So the Zotes that were hated managed to get in anyway. Brian Ansell wins again. And they move in. To give you an idea of how much Brian Ansell was loved, back in White Dwarf number 77, go get White Dwarf number 77. You'll find a PDF somewhere, I'm sure. 100% legal. Go check the table of contents. If you check the table of contents in White Dwarf number 77 and read down the table of contents, it says, sod off Brian Ansell. So if you read it vertically down the table of contents, that's what you'll see. Because he was loved because they changed Games Workshop from the company it was into effectively the Games Workshop we know today. So we have ourselves our new species. Graham wrote himself up an entire army for them. And this entire army was given stats. White Dwarf number, I'm going to guess 102 is where they were dropped in. Graham wrote what I'm going to call an average adventure for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it isn't. It's not a good one. It's not Graham's best work. And literally, okay, you ready for the name? Best name ever. There's a one-eyed fellow hiding in the south of Camendon. That is the name of the adventure. Now, as a small aside, before I move on to what's about to happen, Camendum as a place is still in Warhammer to this day because I fought for it. It's a small aside, but I fought hard for it, and it was located in the big marsh that's in the northern part of Middenheim and the southern part of Nordland, the Schadensumpf. And I put it on all my maps of the Schadensumpf and ensured that when I was giving reference maps, it was there. And it's hit Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4. You'll find it in Archives 1. So Camendum is still there, all the way back from White Dwarf number 102. And the Fimir and this particular adventure. And away we go. We've got a Warhammer army. We've got ourselves Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The Fimir are in. It's going to be all swimmy and brilliant from this point because they're cool, right? Well, no. There were two problems. On one side, we've got the Warhammer Fantasy Battle problem, and on another side, we've got the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay problem. And I'll explain each. Now, there's lots of other things we could say, but these are the two primary issues. And the Warhammer Fantasy Battle one is a bit technical. So, settle in. Warhammer Fantasy Battle has different base sizes. These base sizes have an enormous impact on the game. Now, if we go to Warhammer the Old World, they've simplified it a bit, but when we talk about Warhammer Fantasy Battle and its 8 editions, base sizes were important. The standard base size for a basic troop was 20 millimeters. It's the small base, the small square one that we're all used to. And all human-sized, elf-sized, dwarf-sized, goblin-sized creatures use 20 millimeter. Then you get the hulking creatures. They're the bigger ones. They use 25 millimeters. That's the standard base size for the Old World. That's 25 millimeters. And they were orcs and the Saurus and things like beastmen. They used bigger bases. Then you had monsters. They're the big guys, your ogres and indeed your dragons and minotaurs for a good chunk of the editions as well. And they were on 40 millimeter base size. They were big. And these base sizes were important in a way that a lot of people didn't realize, because base size dictates how many attacks you can get out from your units. It meant that the weaker, smaller units at 20 millimeter could get more attacks out because there was more of them in contact with you. And the bigger bases, because they took up such a large amount of space, they touched far fewer models on the other side, meaning they got fewer attacks out. Now, you might go, so, right, I think I understand this. Maybe I want to put some miniatures down so I can figure out exactly what you mean. But what does this have to do with Fimir? Well, Graham started up the Fimir as if they should be hulking creature size, the size of an orc. And the original Jez Goodwin sculpt, which if you pop up there, you'll probably find, it's on the internet somewhere, was aimed at that. But when they actually then passed them over to the sculptors, that isn't what happened at all. In the slightest. When they made the miniatures, they made big Fimir. And these Fimir that were sculpted, I think the first set was sculpted by, in fact, the only set by Nick Bibby. These were big monster-sized creatures, and they were monstrous metal miniatures. They were pretty cool. But they were on 40 millimeter bases, which means that for a unit, you had to basically spend a bomb because the big monsters were always more expensive. So the unit was enormously expensive to purchase, but was started like it was a far, far smaller creature.
Ooh, that's not good.
And when I say they were shit in Warhammer, I cannot tell you how bad they were. I had a Fimir army because I am a compulsive collector. There's back in the 3rd edition, Graham's army list, and however it was amended throughout the editions, what eventually came out in the Warhammer Armies book as the ally contingent. I used those, and they were bad. Really bad. Because if you had a unit, I mean, even just 3 of them sitting at about that width, you would have about 9-10 humans on them. Which means that they came out with their 3 little attacks or whatever equivalent, depending on what was sitting in their front rack. And in return, they got 8, 9, or 10. They were minced. Absolutely destroyed. Which meant that on the Warhammer Fantasy Battle side, no one bought them. Because they were expensive and they were, bluntly, rubbish. Actually awful. Now, if they'd been put on the correct base size, they would have been fine. But they were not. And thus, They were terrible, and it's fair to say they just didn't sell. I mean, collectors bought them, people who really liked the look of the miniatures bought them, painters bought them, so there was some selling, but not much. Which means that when we eventually arrive at the 4th edition of Warhammer, and they're making choices as to what to include, the Fimir were way down that list. They weren't just unpopular, they basically didn't sell. There was a bunch of armies that didn't sell, but the Fimir were the worst. I mean, the worst. The great idea to make Warhammer unique and exciting turned out to be something that, through a real problem of base size only, a mistake, had turned into something that just didn't sell at all. So on the Warhammer side, we have a problem. But we have another problem over on the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay side. And this is where our trigger warnings are very much getting homed into and focused upon. Because the background for the Fimir had a very unique setup, which had the only females being their mages. They're chaos-aligned mages who had made pacts with chaos in some distant past. The Mired. And that then leads you going, okay, so there's very few females. So where do all the babies come from? Do they just have lots of eggs? Is that how they work? No, it isn't. Because Graham Davis was inspired by myth. And in myth, the monsters that lie beyond the periphery of civilization, beyond the hedge, as it was often referred to, which is why hedge wizards were important, the ones who would stride between the hedge and civilization and the great wild beyond. Those creatures were mythic and scary. And so many myths, particularly Scottish myths, are very much wrapped up with the idea of capturing folks, spiriting them away, changelings, taking them and doing terrible things to them. And in some of them, particularly myths where I come from, up in the very north of Scotland, there's creatures called the trow, the Cluj trow, the Clem trow. There's lots of different types of trow. It's the source word for drow from D&D. And they literally take women away to procreate with them. That's what they do. And this is just basic myth. And Graham thought, yeah, that's scary. That's horrible. That works really well with the dark fantasy that we're creating. But he forgot something. It's a myth, and it's not real. And in a roleplay game, you have to roleplay. And this caused problems. Because the majority of groups back then were young boys doing young boy things. And they were very bemused and amused by this, particularly because it was something sexual and they were kids. And it was dangerous and women are being spirited away. And it perpetuated this extraordinarily and horribly rapey culture around the Fimir because they needed to do it to procreate. It was a core component of it. But it was worse than that because it wasn't just young boys. Many groups also included their girlfriends, often to begin with, but then a lot of female role players as well. And some groups used this as an excuse to assault characters. And they went, but it's in the rules. That's how they do it. And that is bad. Really bad. In fact, there's a small anecdote. I actually had, at Games Day, somebody come up to me who was there with her boyfriend who refused to play Warhammer anymore because that had happened to her character. And she would never play Warhammer again of any stripe. Even coming to Games Day for her was triggering. We had a lovely conversation about it. I apologized it wasn't my fault, but I apologize nevertheless because it's horrible. I mean, it was traumatic for her. And that's real world trauma now. That's not something that's happening in a game and makes for a cool story. It's wrong. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the story and the background that Graham made was bad. It was, however, communicated terribly, in that no thought was given to its communication. And it meant that, bluntly, the Fimir became a species that was always left at a hand's distance because it was problematic. And it was problematic because, well, I don't even need to say why. You've heard the reason. It's bad because it's a roleplay game and we roleplay out stuff that happens. And whilst Slaanesh had been handled quite carefully in how they depicted it, and it had been both horrible, but they'd always gently pulled a curtain over and said, yeah, it's horrible. This is bad shit, but it's bad shit for everybody. It's just bad, man. This wasn't the case for the Fimir. It was targeting women, and people targeted women in their games because that's what the game told them to do. And most of the time, most people didn't feel bad about it. They didn't feel it was a bad thing. They were just playing their game. They were there with their friends, having fun, and it perpetuated an idea that that sort of stuff was acceptable. And it made gaming tables a little bit icky for a lot of people. So you can see why on one side Warhammer Fantasy Battle had a problem, and on the other side Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay had a problem with the Fimir, which meant that Games Workshop, when it came to the 4th edition of Warhammer, went, yeah, fuck those guys. Yeah, we don't need them. We really just don't need them. And they kind of got dropped. But the fantasy roleplay game, when it got picked up by the licensors, Hogshead Publishing in this case, continued using the Fimir because they were a core component of what Warhammer was at that point, and they were a unique identifier. So when the Mired book came out, when the Dying of the Light came out, the Fimir were used. And they often didn't, they sort of drew a veil over all the spirited away into the darkness of the mists and stuff. They don't describe it with any great detail, but it's always there as a core component of the Fimir. And that's it. We're done. Fimir, finished. But no, because as with all things Games Workshop, all things Games Workshop, nothing ever dies. And the trauma of a previous generation is forgotten, and a new generation of writers come in, look backwards and go, hey, this thing's fucking cool. And I'll be very blunt, the Fimir are really cool. And even the problematic aspect of it, if you purely look at it as a mythological construct, is really quite cool because it's a horrific story about the human condition, about all manner of stuff. There's something good in that. They are terrifying. But the ramifications of what it meant for most games meant it had to change. I mean, it just had to, because it can't be like that. You either change it so it's no longer using basically a parasitic relationship with humanity to procreate. You either change that into something else, or if you do include it, you have to have literally a page worth of what this means, how you roleplay it, how it should be done at the table, possibly more than a page. Because problematic things are real. There's problematic stuff in the real world all the time. And there's nothing wrong with Warhammer having problematic bits in it, because Slaanesh exists. There's problematic things everywhere, but we just need to handle it maturely, and it never was. And I'm about to highlight myself as a part of the problem. So as we moved past Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, it was dropped. 2nd edition came out. They did not use the Fimir. 5th edition Warhammer came out. Did not use the Fimir. And so this would continue on. In the 2nd edition, the fact that the Fimir weren't included in the Old World Bestiary was deemed by fans to be a crime. So the writer of the Old World Bestiary, T.S. Lukart, did a quick article. I illustrated it, put it together, slapped it up as basically a piece of fan material that sat on the side. And so there was Fimir in 2nd edition, but it was fan created. But the Fimir kind of never went away. They popped up here or there in novels. They popped up here or there in the slight description. Whenever someone mentioned Marienburg or bogs, there was generally always a quick swirl of, oh, and there's things in the bogs. Demons in the bogs. They are nasty. And they would often do this whenever anything marsh-like popped up in any Warhammer article for anything. But they never said, oh yeah, the Fimir are there and they steal our women. Because that was a little bit of a step too far for Games Workshop. Until it wasn't. Eventually, the trauma of the past had passed, a new team were in place in Warhammer, and we have people who are looking back on what came in the original edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay with nostalgia. And when we eventually got the Storm of Magic book, the Fimir returned to Warhammer. And it was quite shocking. And I mean shocking, because a lot of people out there went, I can't believe they brought them back. Because there was a lot of people who carried trauma at that point. But all the people who didn't carry that trauma and saw them for the first time were like, holy shit, yes, this is freaking cool. We've got Fimir. Yeah, I've learned about those. And there was a particular crowd that especially loved them. And these are the hidden Games Workshop players that many of you may also be. And they were Hero Quest players. Because when MB Games...
Hero Quest players.
Yeah, when MB Games did a deal with Games Workshop to create a game and they made Hero Quest, Games Workshop included the Fimir at the right size, by the way, approximately orc size, because they were a unique creature that they could add to the game that made it identifyingly theirs. And all of the concerns about what the Fimir weren't quite so heavy in that earlier era. And Hero Quest was the entry drug for literally tens of thousands of people into Games Workshop. They played Hero Quest and they went off to find out more about it. Perhaps they bought Advanced Hero Quest. Perhaps they bought Warhammer. Perhaps they bought something else. Hero Quest rocked. And the Fimir were in there with the gargoyle being just awesome. And they didn't have any dodginess attached to them at all. And most people were 100% unaware of their slightly problematic source. So, those people loved the Fimir. And we then come up to almost to today. We have, no, it's not to today. We've got Forge World. They do a whole bunch of new Fimir miniatures as well, which were going to be released, but they blew the Warhammer up, so that never really happened. We got a couple of mentions in the late stage Warhammer 8 edition of Warhammer, but that was enough that meant when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 came around, we could include them. And this is where I'm going to make my mistake. I did. I popped them in there. It wasn't my choice. I didn't choose to put the Fimir in. I probably wouldn't have if it had been my choice. That was already going to be the case when I was brought into the team. And I had to do a write-up for them. And I had to do a write-up that was both sort of generic. Didn't really use the priest's idea very much, so I had to make them a bit wizardy, which was weird. Didn't use any of the names for anywhere else. And spoke to the whole thing of what they were. And the mistake I made was exactly the same mistake Graham made, but in a slightly different way. In that I wrote something that I wish I hadn't. And I wrote the established lore for the Fimir, which is that they take people away and do horrible things to them. They do. They spirit people away. That's been a core component of the Fimir from the beginning. And I thought that was pretty safe, surely. So when the reviews for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 came out, they were pretty much universally positive. I was delighted. But there was a group in the reviewing public that didn't like the game. And you might be thinking, oh, they didn't like the Fimir. Oh, no. It was the opposite. They liked them. This group were the reviewers who were saying things like, almost half the images are women. Why? That's just not realistic for history. Why is there so many women in here? I don't understand. What is this woke nonsense? And then they said this, but at least they included the Fimir. Now we can treat women the way they should be treated at the table. Literally a quotation from a review I got sent to me.
Yikes.
And I was like, no! That's not what I wanted to do! And I remember looking at that aghast, going, oh shit! What have I done? That was awful. And I felt bad. I remember reading that review and my heart sinking. Now, I'll admit, most of that review I was kind of proud about. Because, you know, women are pretty much 50% of humanity, including maybe up to 50% of them in the images in the book seem to me a no-brainer. That in no way seems to be something that I would complain about. So when people were saying, oh, women in our roleplay games, I was sitting there going, damn straight there are, fuck you. I have no problems with you being bothered at all. I have purposely hired women to write for the game for this very reason. But holy crap, when that came out, a tiny little castaway line in the back of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay core book that basically said the bog demons stole people and for their own horrendous demonic purposes. And that got turned into, now we can treat women the way they should be treated at the table. And that was awful. Later on, I would speak to Graham Davis about this. And Graham told me his story of the creation of the Fimir and how he deeply regretted what he had done. He was like, I really wish I hadn't done that now. And we, between us, came to the conclusion that the Fimir were probably, for many people, absolutely unsalvageable. And I'm going to be very clear about this because for a lot of people out there who weren't attached to what came beforehand, they won't get this bit. They'll just be like, the Fimir are cool because you grew up with a cool Fimir. But for a good chunk of people, they aren't. For the woman I met at Games Day, the Fimir will always be a horrific memory from her childhood where her friends sexually assaulted her character and were given permission to do so by the role-playing game they were playing. That is not just problematic, that is wrong. That's just bad. It was badly written then, and when it came round to the 4th edition, no matter how it was couched, that was still a potential issue that lay out there. Meaning that for some people, it will always be unsalvageable. There is no way you can rewrite them that will ever make them acceptable. Ever, for some people. And I'm going to be as blunt as I can about that because there's a lot of fans of the Fimir. But please, if you're a fan of the Fimir and you have somebody come along and say, yeah, no, not for me, under any circumstance, don't call them out. Don't say that's weird. They've changed, man. They've changed. They're better. Don't justify your like of them to them because those people are probably carrying trauma and it's not worth doing. But nevertheless, the Fimir have been repurposed. And through the course of what was released in Warhammer 8 and then what was being released with a bunch of little extra snippets across Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, we've got ourselves a new version of the Fimir. Do they still spirit people away and do terrible things to them for their own demonic purposes? Yeah, almost certainly yes. Are they still reproducing through stealing other people's women? Probably not. That doesn't mean they're not, which is possibly the problem. And this is what I'm going to conclude with my particular introduction with. We're going to be discussing what they've been turned into. And I think the Fimir are really quite awesome. I really like the Fimir. I love this topic, as I said at the beginning of the introduction. But I also kind of hate it. And I kind of hate it because for me, I've got personal issues that have risen from this particular subject. And I've also spoken to the creators, all of whom think that the Fimir were, in some form or in some fashion, a mistake. One of Games Workshop's problems from the past that should perhaps be ignored. In the same way that we don't generally refer to the pygmies anymore. Having said that, though, various White Dwarf articles have talked of copper-skinned small folk like halflings from the jungles of Lustria. That popped up in more than one White Dwarf. So they do get referenced every once in a while. They do arrive, and possibly they'll be repurposed into something good at a later date. But this one is pretty problematic in nature for a lot of people. So, yeah, I think that's worth being as clear about as we possibly can before we dive into all the cool bits about what the Fimir became, because we're going to be discussing that pretty much at length for the rest of this stream, because the Fimir became something quite different while simultaneously kind of being the same, and their background was extended right back into history, where beforehand their background had been tied strongly to the Skaven and the Marienburg marshes in the Marienburg books for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition. That got expanded out right back to before the Cataclysm. So we've got quite a few interesting stories that we're going to be diving into concerning where the Fimir have gone. But I will reiterate one more time. Please be aware that there is going to be some people who are going to be upset that we're even discussing this. Not upset we're doing it. They think we should because it's a part of Warhammer history, but they won't want to watch it because they carry their own issues with it. And I'm cool with that. No, I'm obviously not cool with it, but I understand that's the case, and it's important that we all recognize that before we dive in.
Yeah, so I want to add one little tidbit to this before we kind of get into super chats and the rest of the show, which is that I briefly want to just go through my experience with Fimir because I come at it from a very different angle. I, of course, showed up much later to the party. I, playing Warhammer Fantasy, did not know really the Fimir. Like, you'd see them every once in a while pop up in like a short story or a Black Library book. Yeah. Like, there'd be little mentions of them. There's some really, really cool stories about them. There's one that jumps out at me, I think, from Hammer and Bolter, where it's a whole story about people believing there's a Fimir, and it turns out to be a group of Skaven using this goofy contraption to make themselves look like a Fimir. And then at the end of the story, an actual Fimir shows up and just decimates everybody, showing how terrifying they are. And before it kind of wanders off and the main character escapes, but it kills all the Skaven, which is very funny. But I didn't really get my first experience with the Fimir until the Storm of Magic, when this book shows up and all these things that I had never seen before, because I didn't start playing the game until 2001, suddenly showed up and were super fucking cool, where there were things like Zotes and Fimir and all these weird creatures I had never seen. And I adored them. I loved them. Monstrous Arcanum came out, and Monstrous Arcanum dedicated a significant amount of its artwork to the Fimir, and had gorgeous Fimir art, and they were huge and spooky and scary. So the Fimir for me were always like, oh, these guys are fucking cool. I remember when Total War Warhammer, when they were working on Total War Warhammer 2, I flew out to their studio down in Horsham and went to see like a really early version of the Warhammer 2 build. And while we were there, they gave us a little presentation about the upcoming Norska DLC. And there were Fimir. And I was like, oh my God, fucking Fimir. This is cool. This is awesome. They look great. They were awesome. Very cool. I don't think it was until that DLC hit that I first started becoming kind of aware of the reputation the Fimir had. And it was weird because from my perspective, I never seen anything like that. I'd never seen anything written about that and so when we were getting ready for this stream, I was like, okay, I really want to dive in on this. So I went and read every single piece of Fimir piece of literature I could find. I went and got all the White Dwarfs. I went and read all the fan magazines. I went and read the third edition.
I didn't mention Warpstone.
As a small, don't worry, we'll talk about it in a minute.
Yeah, because I contributed to that.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the Warstone magazine in just a minute, because there's a lot of really cool shit in there. But I went and read the third edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle book, and I was specifically looking for the mention of the Fimir take women for the sake of reproduction, and the Fimir are sterile. It was not listed in any of those publications. None of them. Not once. I went over I went into the entire Fimir catalog, and for the record, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, which was the oldest and where this comes from, came out in 1986.
Yep.
And then the White Dwarf, or the third edition battle game, came out in 1987, and the White Dwarf about them came out in 1988, I think. And Graham Davis wrote the 1988 one.
Yeah, he did.
If you go look at anything about the Fimir, literally anything official or fan made from like people that were involved in creating Warhammer stuff, after their first appearance, there's no mention of this anywhere.
I wonder why.
Yeah, it got immediately annihilated. No,
it didn't. And I think it's worth making sure this is clear. It was a core component of the Fimir for 20 years. It didn't get annihilated. Every writer who was writing about it assumed it was the case, and every player who played the game until Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 came out in 2005. So that's 25 years. Their only place where they got their information from was the core rulebook, and it was stated in black and white. And in 25,
that's a good way to put it.
That's 25 years of people playing with the Fimir with that as the core assumption. So it's easy to say it was pushed aside, but it wasn't. It wasn't until 2005 that we can honestly say that the new rulebook came out to supersede one that came before. And unfortunately, it didn't rewrite the Fimir. And I'm sadly the one that made the mistake when they were first brought back into roleplay, all the way back to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 this time. It still included that little clause saying that they spirit people away. And that was enough for those who knew the first edition to go, yeah, that's what they are then, isn't it? Crap.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm going to really hammer on about when we get into the modern Fimir is how that old tidbit doesn't work with the way that they function now. I'm going to point to a lot of different pieces of evidence. Now, I will admit that before we get into it, if you are hell bent on keeping that aspect of them, there are ways you can do it. Like kind of Andy talked about, I don't think that's something worth salvaging for them. Because I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, I remember reading a lot of fantasy books when I was younger, that were published in like the 1980s and the 1990s. And to put it really bluntly, if you were reading any book by any author ever that was written in that time and it was labeled as like adult fantasy or dark fantasy, sexual assault was a core component of the series. I remember my first ever like dark fantasy book was called Wizard's First Rule, which was a very good book. It was super interesting and fascinating. I was in middle school and it has an entire section of the book where like, well, what the female wizard's power is that if they like touch you, they can dominate your mind. But so there's this whole thing about the villains specifically do things to themselves so that they can sexually assault these women characters without facing any repercussions of it. And there's like the main character gets imprisoned by a woman and tortured by like a dominatrix, and it's very assaulty. And there's one of the villains' whole thing is that he's a pedophile, and it's like that was everywhere in that timeline, that 20-year span of just, if you had a character and you're like, I want to make this character a bad guy, or I want to make this story for mature readers, sexual assault was the go-to button back then. And I think a lot of it is just people just didn't get it.
Yeah.
Male authors didn't get it.
It wasn't just male authors, sadly. I mean, it's a real thing, and it is dark and it's gritty, and I can understand a lot of the arguments there. Plus, particularly when you're dealing with a mythic entity like this, because the Fimir are strongly based in myth. This is a core component of myth also. It's very easy for us to just simply say, this is bad, let's move on. I think it's more complicated than that alone, but this is effectively for a kids game, which is one of the reasons why Slaanesh has always been a problem for Games Workshop, and its depictions of Slaanesh has been a problem, and why they've often steered into things that are perhaps a little bit less sexual. Particularly if you look at, say, the more Hellraiser based ones, drawing more on Clive Barker than perhaps 80s fantasy. Yeah, we have a creature that is 100% problematic at its origin, and writers have come along later and either not overwritten it, or worse, written around it. And I'm also someone who made that mistake without even realizing I was doing it. Ugh.
Don't worry,
to this day, I'm still bugged by it.
We're getting to it right now.
Quite.
Yeah, so I'm going to get through super chats that have come in during this part, and then we're going to hop into what the Fimir are now. And a big part of it is going to be exploring literally everything I could find, and why I think that the old stuff doesn't make sense for where they have gone. But we're going to get into it. So, yeah. Hannibal, afternoon, gents. Just physically winced at someone dubbing a Scotsman British might be more offensive than half of the early Fimir lore. That's very fair.
Yeah, quite.
Him and Brian Ansel looks like turned down with a mullet. With that mullet, yeah. Hey, it was the times, man.
Brian Ansel's mullet was famous.
There is something quite funny about looking at any White Dwarf article that was published before like 2000 and seeing the hair that was on all of the different, because back then you used to see all of the guys that were creating and writing the games that they'd always put their pictures next to their articles, and they had some fascinating hairstyle choices back in the day. Leador, thank you very much. Very, very generous. Thank you. Happy to see you guys live in a while. From a battle game perspective, the inclusion of the Fimir and Norse army implies they might be less fallen to chaos as stated in the past. Would like your opinion of Fimir and Dragons both being from before the old ones. That is going to be where we're literally starting the upcoming conversation.
We're going there. Yeah.
So hold on to your seats. Tradition, lots of parallels between the Fomori of Irish myth and Fimir. Baelor, their one-eyed leader in particular, who likely also inspired Tolkien to create Sauron.
Yeah, it's not just parallels, it's the direct source that was the... to quote Tony Ackland, to paraphrase Tony Ackland, who did the first piece of art that we mentioned earlier, Graham's reduction of Fomorian to Fimir with a quick vowel change was not his most creative idea.
To be fair, that's very on brand for Games Workshop. Like
100% on brand. You know, an attempt to create something entirely new, unlike anything else, definitely hasn't been copy-pasted. Copy-paste the image, copy-paste the name.
It's GW to its core. Jason, thank you very much. Sean Schultz, so the gods of Games Workshop are copy and paste. The blood of Games Workshop is rainbow-colored space marines. What is the body of Games Workshop? It is Fimir. Yeah. Bioflip, my heart breaks at the thought of all the stories we may have missed out on because experiences like that women had with her roleplay group.
I know. It's
I mean, yeah, you can go on to the fucking D&D horror stories subreddit, and this still happens. It still happens, which is insane. Like, please don't assault your players, guys. Unless you're playing a really
unless you're playing a game where everyone's decided that's what they want to play. There's nothing like having a conversation about the game.
Or the campaign.
Communication. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if you want to have a Fet Life Kink campaign, then by all means, have fun with it. But for the love of God, not before the campaign. So a homebrew stream to flesh out Fimir Society Win doesn't actually need it that much, and we'll get into why in a bit.
Yeah, totally.
The Fimir are much more complex than a lot of people tend to give them credit for. WPKM, can you see them? The light of mist, lower your voice. They're not the wisps, the baleful gazes of the Fem Beast. Now run, go, hide your kids. That's great, right?
It's one of the reasons why I really like the Fimir, as I have this love-hate relationship with it. They are horrific creatures from the mist, the bog demons, the things that lurk beyond the safety of your home. They feel mythical. They feel scary. And when you see these lumbering creatures come out of the mist, then, yeah, terrifying. I love them for that. But, yeah, sadly, there's also other issues.
Tech, so the Fimir is the one ring for Andy Law?
I love it, Precious. Hate it, Precious. Yeah, pretty much. Hi, Precious.
So, the Fimir could do with some soft retcons. I'm a sucker for a lot of problematic dark fantasy stuff, but that story Andy just told was horrifying. Yep, we'll get into
agreed.
that.
I agree completely, Cobb. I am also a sucker for this stuff, and I am somewhat controversially also going to say I don't think it needs to be retconned as an idea. For Warhammer, Games Workshop, everything else, definitely. But dark fantasy and all the twists and horrors of it, and the depths of Slaanesh and the depravities that can be found there, are very much a part of what this entire story is. It doesn't need to be retconned to be good, but it does need to be handled better to be good. And that is what hasn't happened, which is why now I think it has to be retconned to be good, to be acceptable at all, because it was so badly handled in the past. In a way that Slaanesh wasn't, that still to this day surprises me. Everybody knew what they were getting with Slaanesh.
Yeah, and I think that's an important element, though, is that you see it coming from a mile away, so you have the chance to divert if you want to, whereas the Fimir may have been more of a you don't realize what it is until it's literally in your face.
You can literally say about, say, for example, Slaanesh. So, Slaanesh, do you huff to abduct people and forcibly impregnate them to exist? No? No, you just do lots of horrible stuff. So you don't need to do this. Where the other side, it was an absolute requirement. It was a core component of the species. And because it was a core component, there was no avoiding it. There was no way of drawing veils across it. It just was what they were. And that gave too many people permission.
Necroman's Cobalt, after hearing that 4th edition story, I wish I could buy Dark Deeds, but I can't for personal reasons. So here's a chat along with my deepest sorry. No writer or editor should have to go through that.
Yeah, and I understand you can't for personal reasons. Totally cool, of course. But everyone else, go buy Dark Deeds. It's sitting behind me over there.
It's a great game. Paul Atreides, hello everyone. I hope that you have a very nice, cozy Sunday. Do you think the Fimir had wars with the fishermen over the bogs and swamps? I would say that would not be a stretch at all in the slightest.
I think that's definitely possible, although I'd say it's more likely to be in the saltwater bogs than the freshwater ones.
Yeah, but like, especially when we get into like days before the old one's arrival, the fishermen and the Fimir are both around in those ballparks. They probably were not super friendly. Charles C.K., amuse my size question ended up being important. How does Andy feel about the modern ones being troll-sized, or do you prefer the original orc-sized intent?
So I prefer the original orc-sized intent because it's what I grew up with. And I was very much a player of HeroQuest, and I just can't help but go, that's what a Fimir is. And when I see the bigger ones, I also go, wow, that's impressive. Can't help that. But there's a small part of me that go, and that's why they died. Because at that point, there wasn't the easy plastic way of resolving your miniatures, and we couldn't do an Ogre Kingdom big base-sized army at all. It just wasn't a fiscally sensible solution. You need plastic for it. But nowadays, you could absolutely do it, but it's going to be a ridiculously expensive army if it's, for example, all made out of resin.
Yeah, I will say that, interestingly, because of the size story, I would 100% agree that took any chance of Fimir had of being a standalone army and shot it in the back of the head.
Yeah. Bang. If they'd been on the base size they originally intended, and you can find the original model that Jez Goodwin made, as I said, if they'd been that size, 100% they almost certainly would have been a standard Warhammer army to this day.
Yeah, but it is interesting that they have very much evolved into a purely monstrous infantry race.
Yep. All because of one miniature designer's decision to make them bigger.
The world, interesting pathways of the world.
It is.
Thoth Apprentice. To me, the parasitic reproduction of Fimir is very important. It comes from the Tolkienian idea that evil cannot create, only destroy or corrupt.
Yeah, that's a very black and white view of evil that very much isn't Warhammer. Warhammer has all manner of creation coming from what we would typically describe as evil. The Tolkien aspect of this is very much a Tolkien thing. It very much isn't, though, a Warhammer thing. So I don't think this is an aspect that we would need to copy paste over and keep because of, for example, those reasons. Warhammer's got tons of examples where evil, in fact, is not just creative, but is more creative than good.
Yeah, I'm also going to, when we talk about modern Fimir, I'm going to take you on a little journey where I hope, if I do a good enough job, you're going to have very complex feelings about the Fimir by the end of it. So you may not feel this way when we get to the end of that.
Fall in love with them?
Mornington Crescent. The Fimir are an example of why it's important to actively remove problematic elements, not just write around them. And that's me for the stream. Thank you, Mornington
100% Mornington Crescent. You are spot on. And that was the mistake I made in 4th edition. I should have explicitly argued and called out that the change was in place. It should not have been written around, and it was. And that was the mistake. I completely agree with you, Mornington Crescent.
Nagwal, I think Andy is too generous. Those players aren't hormonal teens. You can tell when you're going too far with someone, they were just evil. So I disagree. There are people that genuinely don't understand because they haven't had the experience. To them, it's sort of this distant idea. And I could see where you're coming from. I deeply get it. But you have to keep in mind that for a lot of people, empathy is a learned experience. It's being able to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. And especially with young people, that is not their strong suit.
So
and
true.
I remember when I was younger, when I was a teenager, there were a lot of jokes that I made, things that I thought were funny and like edgy humor stuff that I look back on and go, ooh.
Yeah. I completely agree. Young people haven't got the experience yet to realize what they're doing is perhaps what you describe as evil. They often just don't understand. They're trying things out for the first time. They're making their mistakes. And I'm very, very keen not to tar people for mistakes made in their youth. Now, obviously, some mistakes are beyond the pale, but this is just people being stupid mostly. But there are some people who are just bad actors. And the review that I got, for example, I think was from someone that I would definitely describe as a bad actor. And he wasn't a kid, he was an adult. So yeah, he was just wrong.
Yeah, if you've got someone beyond the age of like 25 at the table who's like, I'm going to put women in their place by doing this, that's very different than the 16. That's very different than the 16-year-old that's like
21. You should have learned by then.
Yeah, that's very different from the like 16-year-old that's like, oh, this will show how horrible and evil this guy is and why the party needs to take him down. Like, it's a very different types of situations that can sadly end up in the same place. Phil, I remember being so excited when it looked like Games Workshop was going to introduce a new swamp-dealing destruction faction, Age of Sigmar, and it turned out to be the Cruel Boys. Really gutting stuff. I remember that. That was That was a very funny moment for the fandom.
It was cruel.
Thank you, Andy.
Sorry, it was cruel, boys.
I was definitely very much on team. Oh, the Fimir, and then it wasn't, and I was sad. But it's fine. Jonathan Scott, Nazis and incels try to ruin everything. Fuck those fuckers. Yep, I agree.
Yep.
They're the only. Yeah, no, they're the worst. Darius Rose,
yes.
hi guys. Feeling sad. My hero John Cena became a bad guy at Elimination Chamber I went to in Toronto. He felt chaos like the Fimir. Here's money. I'm sorry that the wrestling storyline has turned against you. That is a bummer.
That is the worst.
That is a bummer. Sarmelian, has there been talk of rebooting the Fimir thoroughly over time? Kind of. Renaming and tweaking the appearance? Not as much. Or just making a different Fimorian-inspired creature? Also not as much. Not as much.
My conversations with Graham, we both came to the conclusion they were unsalvageable, but I think with time I have softened on that and feel that sometimes it's not just worthwhile going back to something that was badly done and salvaging it. I think it is almost essential to reposition these things. So yeah, I don't think his workshop necessarily made much of a mistake, bar I would say one thing, and that is being absolutely 100% clear they are not what they once were.
Yeah, and here's hoping that there are a lot of rumors that the Fimir are coming back with the new Beastman book, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe they'll tackle it for once.
And it's very possible that they might keep that sort of cagey, they do naughty stuff off on the edge. They may keep that. I mean, that has been the suggestion on more than one book, that is a core component of what they are behind the scenes, just not in front of the scenes. I think allowing it to be written around like that is an absolute mistake. If they're doing it, own it. And if they're not doing it, change it and make it clear to everyone it's changed.
Yeah, when I was doing my read up around, I, for the longest time, always assumed that when there was the lines about, they spirit people away, I was always like, oh yeah, because they're sacrificing them to the dark gods. Because the few books that I had read where they had it as like a senior thing. So like if you read the Sigmar trilogy by Graham McNeil, one of the books, I think it's at the start of the second book, has Sigmar fight a Fimir matriarch and a bunch of Fimir. And they interrupt the Fimir sacrificing a woman to the dark gods for, the gods to give them power and stuff. And you read, you go, okay, that's normal Warhammer fantasy stuff. They save the girl. It's a big fight. The Mir's huge. She's massive. Sigmar bops her with Galmaras. Cool. Great story at the end. So I remember for the longest time for me, it was like, oh yeah, they're sacrificing people, which is what like everybody does in Warhammer. That's fine. That's normal. And so I would like them to lean more into that. But anyway, WPK, are they behind the Schlag disappearances? How did they survive the Saurus purges? Secret Fimir realm accessible by magic? Relationship with non-human races? We'll get into that. Don't worry.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing a good chunk of all of that.
I don't know what Schlagkugel is, but sure.
Schlagkugel is a settlement that got wiped out, and it was deemed to be the Fimir.
Ah, well, there you go. MS and Fire, did either of you get a chance to look over the conversation on Warhammer Discord regarding Fimir reproduction? We talked about them replacing souls and transforming the body instead of including SA.
Yeah, turning them into something else.
Yeah, that's a way you can approach it. Yeah, that's absolutely a way you could do it. Very similar to the whatever they're called, the Illithids or whatever from D&D, but soul stuff instead of disgusting tadpoles. Known Captain Hammond, why couldn't they just say, yeah, so there actually are female Fimir guys. They've been hit. Well, there always have been. The matriarchs have been a core component of the Fimir since forever.
Yeah, they've always been led by women. Always been led by women. That is a core component of the Fimir. They are. But yeah, they are also a species that has been broadly said to have effectively drones, lots and lots of men who are drone-like, moving around, working at whatever it is that their female leaders want. But yeah, they've never really properly said, and they don't do this.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we're kind of getting at. That's the thing, is that for all the stuff that I'm going to say, like I said, there are ways that if someone is determined to be like, no, the Fimir definitely still do this, they could argue that, well, it's not explicitly stated anywhere that the Fimir don't do this. Which, granted, I have the very stubborn perspective of, well, I don't give a shit if it's not explicitly mentioned. That I don't need that for me. But for a lot of people, that is a necessary component. Breaks Kid, if they made the Shirls orc size but kept the Fianna the same, we would all be satisfied, I feel. You could do that.
I think you could easily make the Shirls orc sized and it would work quite well. You may even be able to make pretty much just the Shirls orc sized if you were doing that, because you still want the Fim warriors to be big. Yeah. That'd do.
I personally wouldn't, but I have my own reasons for that. Skylar, just watch your map VOD, aka Sotek. Hey, Andy, want to see something frustrating? Love you both, nerds.
That was pretty much the case.
Yeah, you don't. If only you knew how much I do that off stream for funsies. You would be appalled. I'm probably not good for Andy's blood pressure sometimes. Paul Charity, sorry I'm a bit delayed, but I heard Sotek talk about trying mods in Warhammer 3. Crimlo, the Splendorous campaign win. Give me $5,000 and I'll play it. No, never. Not in my life. Federico Velasquez, to which chaos god maybe them attached to one of the old one, maybe Malal/Mallet. So we'll talk about this a little bit, but in the old school Fimir, they had an entity called Balor, who is obviously Balor One Eye from the actual original stuff, but there's not really any description whatsoever on what Balor is. They're just like, oh yeah, there's a thing called Balor that might be a god, or maybe is just like an ancestral Fimir or something. And then he got dropped and never mentioned ever again. Outside of the Warpstone magazine, which we'll get into in just a minute.
Yeah, Warpstone dived into that.
Necromancer Cobalt, anyone who wants to blame the kids who played with the OG Fimir, how many of you were Xbox Live COD kids? How many slurs left your mouth? You know, a lot of people made mistakes in their youth. Yeah.
Yes, they did. And they didn't even realize what they were saying half the time. It was just words that were cycling around in circles. And then one day they learn and they go, oh, maybe I'll stop doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there have been several times in my life where I had a behavior or a phrase or a word or a joke that I would use, and someone would finally go, "Ooh, do you have to say that?" And I'd be like, "Well, what's the problem?" And they would explain it, and I'd go, "Oh, shit. I did not know that.
What have I been doing?"
I will excise that from my vocabulary. Thank you for letting me know. Now, the mistake wasn't starting or trying. Mistake was ignoring the obvious signs of the player. That's what's obvious. That's what evil. So, I will say, okay, so if you're, how do I say this? It's not always easy to tell when you're sitting at a table having fun with folks that there is someone that may be getting uncomfortable, because not everyone expresses discomfort in an obvious way, which is important.
And particularly in these sort of situations, some people are desperate to be cool.
Yeah,
and they're desperate to be cool in a situation that quickly becomes uncool, and they put on a face of being fine, go away, and aren't.
Yeah, so I would say that I see where you're coming from, and I think I see what you're trying to say. And I agree that if someone is making people at their table uncomfortable and it's very obvious, and they bring it up and say, "Hey, could we not?" and then they just keep dialing down, that's fucked up and that's super not cool. But I would also encourage people to be open-minded when they're helping people learn better behaviors. It's not always obvious when you're sticking your hand in a bear trap, because a lot of people, when they become profoundly uncomfortable, will hide it, which is unfortunate. Krimgelto, I'm no Fimir. Don't got their power. Don't want them. Krimgelto has spoken. Super Olak, I feel that Fimir are a bit like Araby, where they need a good rewrite because they're just close enough to the surface that you will find them. Yes, you'll see where we're going with this in a minute. My church warden pipe brimming with premium tobacco, an old world mod Warhammer 3 campaign. My favorite podcasts are doing their thing. The Perfect Sunday. That sounds like a very, very relaxed old man Sunday. Good for you. Enjoy your pipe. Marathi, okay, real talk. Oh, here we go. Marathi, okay, real talk. I've had some bad experiences, and what I don't get is why the Fimir get focused on for being problematic when I've seen Beastmen and Dark Elf stuff that I personally find very triggering. Reason I like to dunk on Marathi. That's fair. You're not wrong. That's something I've had that discussion before. I remember when my very first ever, and I know there are some people in the chat that are probably like, God, would they shut up and just talk about the lore? I promise this is worth doing for some people that are listening, so bear with us. I remember when the very first video I ever did on my channel was how Warhammer races breed video, which is very funny in retrospect. And a very stupid way to start a YouTube channel, but it is what it is. And when I was doing the Beastmen, I remember I sat for a long time thinking about what I wanted to say, because it is not a secret that for a lot of earlier Warhammer, it's not that hard to find. It's in various Black Library books. It's kind of talked about in one of the original short stories for Gotrek and Felix, that one of the ways beastmen were considered to propagate was they would take women and they would take them back to the herdstones and do terrible things to them, and beastmen babies would be born. And that sort of got not overwritten, but it just got ignored. But I think, in my opinion, this dials back to what Andy said earlier, which is that when you have the Dark Elves and the Beastmen and all this other stuff, it's something they can do, but it wasn't something they have to do. Yeah, that was the difference.
That's it. And in fact, if you're going to take anything from all of this, just that one point, all of the other terrible things that happen in the Warhammer world are by choice. The Fimir don't have a choice. They don't have one. They have to do it. And that is problematic in a way that other things aren't when it hits tables, because people are then have their own choice how they wish to depict it. There is no other way to depict this if you run with the original background. And that causes deep issues. And that's why all of the various awfulness that might come from Dark Elves or might come from Beastmen or Skaven or whatever, and it's awful, truly terrible crap. All of that, you can still go, but there's examples where that doesn't happen. And these things don't necessarily work this way. And yes, it's a terrible world, but, in this case, there is no but. There is only one way to resolve it. And that's why it's the one that gets picked on most.
Yeah, and I also agree with Lindsay here that this is also kind of a natural, I think, consequence of the fact that they kind of got dropped and not super further developed, was that it was a gigantic glaring sun in the very small existence that they had. But Hammond, I did catch it. Andy, as a Brit, is there a creature that you think they should have added instead of the Fimir from
Holy crap.
As a Brit? Doubling down.
I mean, he's doing it on purpose, isn't he?
Yeah.
There are so many things that I like in Scottish myth and folklore in particular, because I'm going there. I have a great love of Kelpies and the various other waterborne beasties that you find throughout Scottish myths, and various Scottish shapeshifters as well. But I will say that there is a ton of what we are calling here problematic material in Scottish and Irish and English myth. It is everywhere. The fact that Graham included this in the description for the Fimir is in no way controversial, and in no way is it seen as some people have actually pitched it as he was rebelling against Games Workshop and purposefully putting a spanner in the wrenches. You know, that classic "we don't like Brian Ansell" thing. Not at all the case. He's just a fan of myth, and it was not realized what would happen with the material that he created. So yeah, I'd probably take a Kelpie or two. I could do like a Kelpie.
Phil, don't know if you've addressed this earlier in the stream, but you know the story. Yes, we did discuss the origin of the Fimir. It's a bit of a hilarious classic Warhammer copy pasta moment. Kobo, idea. Fimir called Balrog inexplicably prefers Khorne over the other dark gods. Everyone keeps mispronouncing his name and calls him Balor. That would be a very silly Warhammer 4th edition storyline, in my opinion. All right, so
and you had the Balgorg as well already in Warhammer, so yeah,
it's not that.
I think it's time for you to go to town on the slightly nicer side. I think I've done enough. Basically saying, eek! Let's now go over to the
So Fimir in modern Warhammer, where are we at? They've changed a lot. The Fimir, like Andy said, kind of vanished off the face of the earth for a long time, and then as they reappeared. From my experience, outside of little black library mentions here and there, they really burst back onto the scene with the Storm of Magic, which evolved into the Monsters Arcanum, which cemented them. They evolved further then with the release of Total War Warhammer 2's release in the Norse Capri DLC, and then they came back bigger and stronger in Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition roleplay, which got expanded upon with the Lustria book and with the Winds of Magic book. So they showed up over several different books and got more and more and more and more and more added to them with each book. So the modern Fimir, the first thing to establish is that they are old. They are beyond old, horribly ancient. They predate the old ones. They are one of the original species on the Warhammer Fantasy planet that existed here before the coming of the gods, when most of the world is covered in ice other than a thin equatorial band of primordial jungle. But a lot of those icy places had cold mires or frozen bogs where there was just enough warmth that the ice would melt and create these really saturated areas, and along these coastlines, storm-racked coastlines with lots of the sun was, of course, further away from the world back then, because that's why there was a lot more ice. And the Fimir thrived in this environment. This was their world, along with several other species. Obviously, the dragons were the dominant force, but the Fimir did well for themselves, hiding in the mists, because the mists kept them hidden from predators. The mist kept them hidden from big, ugly, nasty things that could come down and eat them for lunch. Now, there's an important thing to point out right away with this big, massive change to the Fimir, of going from a race that just kind of existed in the world to a race that comes from the pre-old ones, which is that looking at this already, we can look and go, okay, there are no humans. There is no humans for the Fimir to show up and kidnap in the middle of the night to allow their species to continue to propagate. So they have to have some other method. Now, if you want, you could, of course, be like, oh, well, they use some other kind of creature. You could do that. But
the original tale was that they were cursed by chaos when they did their deal.
Yeah, so that is going to be the other thing I was going to dive on a little bit. But this is the first chip in a number of swings that I'm going to be throwing, which is that we have a successful, thriving Fimir culture that does not have a relationship with humanity. So now, the Lustria book does something really interesting with the Fimir, which it talks about that the Fimir worship the dark gods before the arrival of the old ones.
Yeah, that was a thing.
They were a unique species that, through their own abilities to interact with the smaller amounts of magic in the world, because there was magic, there just wasn't a lot of it. Not nearly as much as there would be when the old ones show up and open the big portals. And the Fimir were apparently gifted enough that they were to establish a connection of some sort with something in the ether. And by doing so, they started worshiping these nameless entities. They probably were not what we understand as the Dark Gods nowadays, so it probably wasn't your Tzeentch-Khorne Nurgle Slaanesh combo, but it was likely something weirder, something stranger, more nebulous. And in some versions...
I'd just like to pop in one little part, because I think it is worth saying that given the small changes that have been added by Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition, assuming we take them all and Games Workshop takes them on board, it does suggest that the Fimir are responsible for the Chaos Gods.
That's what I was about to say.
Which is super interesting, because these aren't the 40k entities, which are the eon spanning all over the place entities. We have quite a few descriptions of how the gods developed over time, and they weren't what they were to begin with, and they changed into in particular the four great chaos powers that we know later. They became those over time. Their first demons weren't the greater demons that we know today. The first demons were amorphous and strange, and they slowly but surely during the cataclysm became what they became later. And if we run with that version, then it looks very likely that the Fim were responsible for what would eventually be the downfall of the world. And I quite like that story.
Yeah, there is a suggestion in the Lustria book that the Fimir bring the attention of chaos. That they are the first race in all of the Warhammer world to establish a connection with these entities. And this will be important for their story later. So we move forward in time a bit. The Old Ones show up. The Old Ones show up to this planet, and they are the big bad colonists. From the Fimir perspective, this alien race shows up that just fucks up their environment.
Yeah, think every single alien invasion movie. That's what's just happened.
Yeah, they moved the planet closer to the sun. So from the Fimir's perspective, the world just got a lot hotter. Which isn't necessarily horrible for them because they're able to retreat into the cold depths of the marshes, but they do not do well with sunlight. Sunlight is very harsh on them. It hurts. And they don't do well with heat. They're a very cold-blooded species that like a low body temperature. Mm-hmm. So they retreat deeper into the fogs and the mists and the marshes while the Old Ones start developing the planet. Now, the Fimir were not one of the races approved by the Old Ones. So they face the extermination wars.
Annihilation.
So not only has the planet that the Fimir been on for God knows how long, and their civilization is primitive, debatably, compared to other species, though I'll talk about a fun thing about the Fimir in a second. They do have a civilization. They do have a culture and a thriving set of myths and religions, and the Old Ones show up and just curb stomp them. There are mentions that when the Old Ones arrive, they find a species of reptilian-like creatures in the jungles of Lustria, and they seize them and raise them up into the lizardmen. Now, we don't know what these were. They might have been something kind of like the fishmen. They might have been something kind of like the Naga. They might have been the Fimir. But nonetheless, they grab a race and do something to them. And the Fimir are one of the races that go up against the legions of Saurus, and they do badly. The Fimir get massacred. And they do what anyone would do in that situation. They pray to their gods. They pray for deliverance. They pray for safety, for the ability to survive. And with the arrival of the Old Ones and the opening of the gates, they start hearing a lot more back. As the gods, the Chaos gods, start to wake up and start to become what we know them as, where the more and more species the Old Ones are creating is causing these kind of weird reverberations back in the ether. The Old Ones moving through the ether a lot is always stated as disturbing the things that slumber there. And the Fimir make more and more of a connection with these gods until this point builds up and up and up and up. And the Fimir, I would argue, play a significant role in this building up, and the gods start to put more and more pressure on the gates, and something, we don't know exactly what, but something finally happens where the gates explode. And they shatter, and both the North and South Pole, the reality is torn asunder, and chaos and the gods themselves of chaos enter reality. And it's bad.
Yeah, I'd add one other small part. Much like we had in the Dragon Ogre stream, where we had a big discussion as to the nature of the Chaos Gods and where they came from and how they reached out before the Cataclysm. They were definitely a thing before. Dragon Ogres have made that a certainty. The Fimir, in turn, also make that a certainty. And it seems pretty obvious that, like the Dragon Ogres, they made a deal for their survival. That seems to be the case. And that deal may be above and beyond their simple chaos worship. It looks like they may have gone further. It could be an individual deity like Baelor. It could be something else. But something has occurred in the vast depths of time that have left the Fimir a pretty cursed species. They're not in a good place. They're not the most populous. They're not in a great area, and it wouldn't surprise me if they have basically the same thing as the Dragon Ogres, but in a very different way. The Dragon Ogres made an alliance.
Yeah. And
they didn't make an alliance.
Yeah. So the Fimir go full Team Chaos. They throw themselves at the feet of the Dark Gods, and they become its servants. So the concept of slaves to darkness, which is what we understand as the warriors of chaos and other things like that, that's what the Fimir are. They are the first true slaves to darkness. They give themselves entirely to chaos. Their souls, gone. Done for. Sold. And the Fimir gain power from this. One of the things that I would argue very much the Fimir gain as a benefit is the ability to create their mystical mist, the mystic mist or the fog, which is that the Fimir know this very unique form of magic where they can just conjure this almost living fog that keeps them forever out of the sun's gaze. Because once again, the sun sucks for them. Not a good time. And the Fimir, their empire rises during the Cataclysm. They build up this incredible empire that stretches across the world. The Monsters Arcanum talks about that the Fimir are a great known power in the old world in what we now know as the Wasteland near Marienburg. They dominate that coastline because that coastline is known for having a lot of storms and cloud cover, and it's cold and miserable. But they also were heavily in Norska. They're in Albion. And it talks about they're even as far away as Grand Cathay, Koresh, and the southern coastline of the Darklands. So they are a huge nation of scattered tribes. Now, one of the things that's important about Fimir culture is that the Fimir do not empire build like most. The Fimir are organized in clans. And a Fimir clan has one matriarch. That's it. One. If a new matriarch is born, the Fimir make a decision. They either, if the matriarch does not want to, let's say, deal with a potential challenger or a daughter that she has to educate and train up, they'll kill the child. This is talked about in some older lore. But sometimes they will accept the daughter, and one of two things will happen. Either the daughter will be raised up and will replace her mother because her mother is maybe getting very, very old. Though there are notes, even if you go back to the old lore of Fimir Mirgs being making it as old as 2000 or being immortal, depending on who you ask. They live for a super fucking long time.
Yep.
But the daughter might try and replace her mother. Or, much more likely, when she reaches a proper age and has been tutored in all the ways of the Fimir, she leaves. And she takes a bunch of the male Fimir with her, and she goes starts a new clan. So that's generally how they spread, is that a new matriarch is born, raised up by her mother. Her mother teaches her all of the secrets of magic and Fimir culture and all this stuff, and then they scatter off. Now, one of the other interesting powers about the Fimir is that they are pretty goddamn good at demon summoning. That has been a really core component of their lore since the early days, is that the Mirgs are incredible demon summoners, as are the Bale Fiends or the Directs. And we'll talk more about that a little later, but they have this really interesting dynamic as creatures that were seemingly gifted a lot of knowledge on how to protect themselves so they could travel out into the world and that they could bring demons out of the ether. Now that's really interesting to me because that also seems to almost suggest that either before the Cataclysm or right after it resolved, because during the Cataclysm, this would not have been necessary. During the Cataclysm, demons could just go wherever they wanted. No problem whatsoever. But needing to manifest demons indicates that there's less magic in the world. Now, we don't know if the secret was taught before or after the Cataclysm, but either way, there's an interesting story there. Mm-hmm. But during the Cataclysm era, we do get some early wars between the elves, the dwarves, and the Fimir, where the elves are trying to expand some of the colonies. We know, like, Kaldor Dragon Tamer was kicking around the old world, and Arian was kicking around parts of the world. Grimnir was fighting, and the Fimir were full on Team Chaos. And there were some early wars between them. But ultimately, Chaos is defeated, and when the Dark Gods vanish, the situation for the Mirror turns really bad really quick. Because their patrons, their big bosses, just left. And the elves come. And the elves...
They're left with all of the negatives of their chaos worship and none of the benefits.
Yeah, so the elves come to the old world. And the elves look at all that coastline, that beautiful coastline, and go, oh, that's going to be mine now. The problem is somebody already lives there, and it's the Fimir. And this ends up being one of the greatest wars of the Fimir's existence. And they lose terribly. Yeah. They get their asses kicked by Malekith or Malarian, who leads the elves riding on a dragon with a great army that has survived the Cataclysm and has been honed into an incredibly powerful warlike race. And the Fimir over in the old world, other than a couple of skirmishes with the dwarves and elves where they were backed up by demons and other beastmen and other worshippers of the dark gods, the Fimir were mostly at this point just kind of dealing with like the early ancestors of humanity, which were pretty easy to kick over compared to fully armed and armored elves wielding a weird new form of magic, probably from a Fimir perspective, that also had fucking dragons.
Yeah, it's a funny one because we've got ourselves a species that was clearly once dominant. Not only once because they were right at the very beginning of time, they probably weren't dominant at all. They were in a world of monsters, and they were the small guys. They had their own misty settlements that were difficult to live through the horrors of what was around them. Then the old ones come, completely screw them over. Saurus are attacking on all sides. They make their pacts with chaos, and then they rise. And they rise big time. And they are all over the world doing their own thing, kicking in what would be deemed as the good guys by most of us. Killing elves, killing dwarves, killing greenskins too, because there's always greenskins. And almost certainly teaming up with Team Chaos on every single front and really benefiting from this. Then the Cataclysm comes to an end, magic is sucked from the world, and they're left with a vague trickle of what they had before. Their connection to Ulgu and the mists being the only thing allowing them to survive. And then the elves go off around the world and they slaughter anything in their way. It's almost like a second coming of the Saurus. And the poor old Fim are pretty much pushed to the very extremes of the various places where they can be found. So there's lots of other stories about the Cursed Marshes, which is a core component of where the Fimir come from in most of their myths, largely because of the Marienburg book. And I'm quite interested to see how they try to tackle it in the next Marienburg book, because the new version of the Fimir doesn't match the original version that was inside Marienburg, where the Fimir go to war with the Skaven, and they had an actual almost empire there. It was a bountiful place. Then the Skaven and the Fimir go to war, it corrupts, and the Fimir fall to chaos at this point. There's lots of different tales around that, but the new version of the Cursed Marshes is probably, they're cursed from the beginning because of the Fimir. And have been all the way since the beginning of time, which will be a massive change. And it'll be very interesting to see if that's how they port it over into the new Marienburg book, or whether they just copy-paste the old story, don't think about it, and create an interesting contradiction.
Yeah, so their story isn't over yet, because there are a couple other little things that happen, which, of course, the big one is that although, and now I do want to say, despite the fact of we're kind of glossing over it may sound like the Fimir are kind of like garbage and stuff, but the Fimir are very scary. We'll talk a bit more about their tech and stuff in a little bit, but the Fimir are a surprisingly magical, powerful race when it comes to the creation of items and their abilities, but we'll talk about that in a little while. So
I think it's I'll also reinforce that. It's not that the Fimir were rubbish and were beaten by the elves, it's that the Fimir were defeated. Chaos had left the world. They had yet to reconstruct into what they would eventually become later. They were in a bad place because they were the Chaos side.
Yeah, so the Fimir have a story change at this point, which is something that very heavily separates them from the Dragon Ogres and shows the difference between the alliance of the Dragon Ogres and the Dark Gods and the servitude of the Fimir to the Dark Gods, which is that the gods are disappointed. The Fimir failed them. Be'lakor failed them. Mm-hmm. And just like with Be'lakor, the Fimir are punished. And the Dark Gods abandoned them. This is a very important part of their story, which is that the Dark Gods turn their backs on the Fimir and utterly abandon them. Without the eye of the gods closes, and the Fimir are left, and they know it. Their population begins to dwindle more and more and more, and they start fighting with other worshippers of the Dark Gods, whether they're beastmen or humans or these other new rising races, because their gods no longer help them. They no longer get blessings. They no longer get the dreams and premonitions of the gods. What power they get from chaos, they must take. They must summon demons using the knowledge and rituals they have and the power of true names, and attempt to bind them, but the demons are not friendly. The demons are very dangerous, and the Fimir are extremely good at handling them. They're some of the most experienced demonologists in the entire setting. But nonetheless, what notes we do have about demons interacting with the Fimir, it is not a good relationship. It's kind of like the Chaos Dwarfs and demons, where it's adversarial. The demons are a resource, and they know it. But the Fimir are so heavily abandoned that they lose all of the gifts the gods used to give them. And the only thing they have is the knowledge they have, which is continuing to dwindle because they're dying. And humanity starts to rise up because humanity is now the Dark God's favorite. Humanity has taken the place of the Fimir. And this is a story that we see repeated in the Beastmen, where the Beastmen despise humanity because they become the favorite child. Now, the Beastmen are at least still able to keep the gods' attention from time to time and amuse them, and still have a barely, but still have a somewhat positive relationship. The Fimir are so heavily abandoned that the Fimir hate everybody. They hate humanity. They hate the Beastmen. They hate the other followers of Chaos. They hate the elves. They hate the dwarves. They hate everybody because everybody's either trying to kill them or everybody is more liked than they are. And they are struggling to survive in their big black fortresses hiding out in the mist. Now, they're still powerful. They're still dangerous enough that they are holding on to certain areas. But as humanity grows, humanity starts to move in. And the elves, granted, the elves do get kicked out by the dwarves, which the Fimir were probably like, hooray! And we're able to expand a little bit. But then humanity fills that vacuum because the Fimir don't reproduce that fast. They are noted as a dying race. They're like the elves and the dwarves, where their reproduction isn't high enough to keep up with their dwindling population. Which, once again, this is another swing I'm going to put at the storyline of that they use humans to reproduce. Because surely if the human population was exploding, the Fimir population should explode as well from the same logic of they have more people to produce young from. Is an argument I will make. It's another swing. I'm just saying.
Yeah, swing on.
But the Fimir are not, their reproduction plummets in this era, and they become a dying race. That's something that's heavily reinforced. So they're abandoned, they're dying off, they're struggling. Now, there are a couple of myths that talk about that there are still places of strength with the Fimir. They're still very powerful within like the wasteland around Marienburg. And there's a really cool note that off the western shores of the old world, there is an island. And there is a mysterious island that the Fimir are said to dominate that is said to be their capital. That is this great towering edifice so deeply enshrouded in mist that it cannot be seen, but it moves. It's an island that is said to sink beneath the waves before reappearing somewhere else and popping back up. And it moves around so that no one can find it other than the Fimir itself. We don't know anything else about it. That's literally all we know about it. They supposedly have a secret capital that just teleports around. Neat. But this is where we get my favorite update to the Fimir that made them go from a really cool race I liked a bit to something I genuinely fell in love with. And it was the Winds of Magic book, which there are a lot of parts of that book I don't like, but this is one of the parts of the book that I love, which is that they introduce a Fimir character. And we get Muna Mim. And Muna Mim is one of the calling her an antagonist is appropriate. She's like a notable character at the end of the book, along with like the fucking Blue Scribes and Egrim von Horseman, which is a funny roster. But Muna Mim is brought up, and Muna Mim takes the story that should be the focus of the Fimir story that I love, which is that they are a deeply, deeply tragic race of a group of native beings that have been so deeply exploited by colonizing entities that they're just left utterly broken. Whether it's the old ones or the chaos gods who take advantage of them and use them as a resource and then toss them aside once they're no longer useful, to the arrival of the elves, to the arrival of humanity, all of which are not native to the Warhammer world, but the Fimir are. And Muna Mim is a matriarch. She's a Mired that lives in the Furdeets, which is this big old nasty swamp around Karlberg. And Muna Mim's story, which if you played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the Fimir pop up quite a bit. They're one of my favorite short stories, and if you're ever like getting into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, it's always like my recommended top 2, top 3 short campaigns is If Looks Could Kill, which focuses on a fallen Fimir clan. It's a part of their story, a notable part of the story.
Damn
where
straight it is.
You literally find the corpse of a Mired buried beneath a cairn. It's very tragic. And there's a big basilisk, and it's super cool. It's such a fucking great story if you're new to GMing or new to playing the game. But Muna Mem is alone. She's completely alone. And one of the things that I really, really like about her story is I think it introduces another really big swing towards the idea that the Fimir need the humans, because it talks about that Fimir cannot, as her people dwindled, and it was just like the last few of the like Fimir, the Fomorians, the Fimir nobles, and the Fim and the Shurls, she couldn't have any more daughters, and she couldn't have any more sons. That her children start dying off around her, and when the last of the Directs dies, that's when she loses essentially her partners. Of the Directs are the only of the other Fimir that could learn magic. They're the sorcerers, the male sorcerers, and they're the only ones that live long enough to have any hope of learning any wisdom from her. And when the last of the Directs dies, her clan is doomed. Which to me implies a relationship between how the Mirgs reproduce, but I'm going to finish her story because that's the important part. So she's utterly alone. Her clan has completely died off. They're all dead. She sits alone in a tower, and she wanders the Fyrdeets. And the only thing she has for company are fen beasts, which are magical constructs made out of like swamp matter. Just think of like a big swamp golem. That's essentially what they are. They don't think
swamp
or anything.
Things.
Yeah, the swamp things. But they don't, they don't have a personality or anything. They just do as they're instructed, almost like undead. They're just big constructs. And it talks about how Muna Mem is lonely. She's terribly lonely. And she has been stuck alone in the Fyrdeets in her tower for hundreds of years. She's been around for fucking ever. Like, she predates the Vampire Wars and a bunch of other stuff. She's over 1,000 years old. And as she's been sitting there in her tower for the last, I think, like 500 years, she's been alone, because as the humans of Karlberg and Altdorf expanded and expanded and expanded, they kept getting into fights with her people and killed them all. All of her clan is dead. And as she sits in her tower, there talks about how she could summon demons, but she doesn't like demons. She thinks that the demons always want something. They're always trying to manipulate the situation, take advantage of the situation. So she refuses to summon them. She doesn't want to work with demons. And as she sits alone, she's depressed. She doesn't attack anyone. She doesn't have any grand schemes. Talks about how the Fimir, even when she was at her height, they really were just trying to survive. And she's just kind of waiting for death. But eventually she comes across an elven waystone, and a shattered one. And when she comes across it, she looks at it and kind of figures out what it is, because it explores a little bit that the Fimir in general, but especially the Diracs and the Mirgs, have something called the Veil Eye, which is that their Cyclopean eye can see the winds of magic pretty much perfectly. They can see it, and they can influence it with their eye, which is kind of wild. And they are very, very nasty casters that have a lot of really notable knowledge when it comes to things like Olgu, dark magic, and I think Total War even expands it to like fire magic and death magic and some other stuff. But
it's a choice.
Yeah, I know fire magic and
death magic I can almost argue, but fire?
Yeah, fire is an interesting choice.
That's a choice.
I think that fell under the classic Storm of Magic.
It's the Bale fire. It's because of the Bale fire.
There you go. Yeah, there
you go.
Total War and its Storm of Magic with classic. Oh, fire's a bad guy, lore, right?
Yeah.
But so Muna Mem seeing this waystone, realizes that the magic that's supposed to be flowing to the vortex is stagnating under this shattered waystone, and so the magic is stagnating, and it's causing negative effects on the Fyrdeets. And she realizes that if she manipulates this big old pool of magic, she can cause the Fyrdeets to start to expand, to basically start to bubble outwards. And so she goes around digging up waystone shards and stealing knowledge from various like temples and libraries and stuff from the humans, and is working on expanding the Ferdines because she becomes obsessed with revenge. Of that, she wants humanity to feel what it feels like to be a Fimir. She wants them to feel her depression. She wants them to feel her loneliness. And she becomes convinced that the best way to do that is to expand the cold mire until it floods their cities, until it overgrows their temples, and until they're all forced to live in the foggy, desolate hell that she lives in. And they can understand just a fraction of her suffering. And one of the things I love about her write-up is that the author goes into great detail about how she could be used as a nemesis or as an ally. And one of the things that it talks about is that Muna Mim as a nemesis, she is very much portrayed in what I would lovingly call a Saturday morning cartoon villain, where she very explicitly has said she does not want to kill anyone. She doesn't want to kill the PCs. If she catches anyone, she wants to yell at them. She wants to rail at them and rant at them and accuse them of killing her sons and accuse them of killing her people and get out all of her anger and frustration, but she just wants to talk to somebody. And as a nemesis, she deliberately doesn't want to kill anyone. She wants them to get away. She wants to have an enemy that she can play off of because it allows her to just interact with somebody, to just not be alone anymore. But they also give a note about how she can become your patron or your ally, that if you decide to be kind towards her, and if you decide to see her as more than just a big, horrible monster and understand the humanized aspect, for lack of a better term, behind her, that by trying to understand her suffering, you can genuinely dissuade her from her plot and instead become friends with her, though it's difficult to do so. And I will say that we were talking about Wolfrip experiences earlier. So I'm in a Wolfrip campaign that I play on Sundays, right after Lorebeards, every week. And in my campaign, we went through a bit of a storyline. And my GM, who's an excellent GM, he's great, he's super cool, by the way, decided to use Muna Mim. Which was an awesome surprise because I fucking love her. And we got into this big fight, and most of my party, I would say like 2 of us are very, very, very up to date and keen and aware of Warhammer lore, and the other 4 either don't know anything or know very, very little. And I always do my best that I don't insert lore unless someone deliberately asks me. I don't like to try and give people information that I don't think they should have, because I think it makes the experience more natural. And we get this big fight with Muna Mim. We were trying to save a steam tank that got stuck out there, which is from the Emperor's Wrath short story. Super fun time. Muna Mim shows up. She's beating our asses because she's got so many fin beasts. It's bad. And one fin beast is super fucking scary, but like 5 of them, even with the steam tank, very fucking scary. And she kidnaps one of our PCs. We're fighting. She takes one of our PCs and runs off into the fog. She takes a girl called Uta, who's one of our party members. Classic Fimir story. Fimir shows up, grabs the girl in our party, runs back into the fog. And we're like, shit, we gotta go save her. This is bad. My witch hunter's like, I'm gonna kill that thing. So my GM has a solo session, not a solo session, but essentially a solo session with this female PC, Uta and Muna Mim. And once again, Uta, her player, doesn't know anything about Fimir. Doesn't know anything about their history. She's just playing off what happens in the story. And she falls in love with Muna Mim. Not the character, the player. The character, though, feels horrible for Muna Mim. And despite the extreme language barrier, figures a lot out about Muna Mim and decides, I'm going to protect this thing. This thing is lonely. And granted, she's from a very low-class society type thing and has always been like the empathetic character in our party. So I think the GM chose wisely to grab her and not like the witch hunter, because I would have just died. And when our party catches up with her, she literally put her character on the line to protect Muna Mim from the party. I was like, I'm going to kill that thing because I'm a fucking witch hunter. And she literally got in the way and was like, if you're going to fight this thing, I'm going to fight you. And it caused a whole fucking very dramatic thing. It was great. I had to roll so many cool checks for my character about whether he would lose his shit and try and shoot somebody. Sadly, I passed all of them. So I did not get to shoot anyone. But it was a really great time, and it caused a lot of really deep ramifications and a split in the party for many, many, many sessions after that. Because there was this thing of, why did we just help a chaos creature? And it was a really fun, cool storyline. And I'm like, I fucking love this. And for me, that is what the Fimir should be. Is the story of a race that has been so badly maligned by every single force that they've run into that they're just left depressed and hating everything around them. But you understand why. Where even chaos picked them up, threw them aside. The old ones looked at them and said, these aren't worthy of life, and tried to eradicate them.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to be picking up the Fimir today and doing some writing for it, leaning into that is not just a no-brainer. It sort of makes a nice metaphorical sense as well, because it's exactly what happened to the Fimir anyway. They were cast aside by GW. They were cast aside because they didn't sell. Yes, they had problematic elements over on the roleplay side, but for all we focused on that to some degree, the real reason they were cast aside is because they didn't sell. And that's it. They just weren't popular enough. And I think that should stand as a standard metaphor for all writing that you do with them. They're just not popular enough. Nobody likes them. And it makes for some super cool stories that could run all the way through. Because their recreation, whether it's their Bale Fiends or whatever else that have been dropped in various books, have built a new version of the story. And it's one that I think could be easily built up into something truly cool. Do I think they should have an entire army? Yeah, I think that would be cool. But I also think that it would be a shame to run away from what they are, which is the least popular species in Warhammer.
Yeah, now I will say that, like we kind of talked about earlier, I think it's fine that if someone wants to have, there are Fimir clans out there that use this terrible method to make more of themselves. And that's a story somebody wants to run with, that can be done. I don't think it's that big of a stretch at all. There's a lot of horrible shit. I mean, fuck, you can look over at 40K. There's a really infamous 40K writer who did a whole thing with Chaos Space Marines of essentially that, the Demoniculaba or whatever it's called, which was very grotesque and unnecessarily detailed. For the Fimir, it's a story you can run with. But the thing that I much prefer is the idea that they can reproduce, but it's slow. It requires the directs. It requires a Mired, and that it is a exhaustive process because they don't have any help with it. Where there used to be like the power of the gods behind them. There used to be a lot more magic in the world. Now there's only a trickle. And considering how innately magical the Fimir are, the Baelai is literally a part of magic. They have magic in their DNA. They're almost like the elves in that sense, where if there's not enough magic, they seem to just start dying of that. Yeah. Maybe it's really hard for their young to survive the process of eggs or birth. I'd probably be eggs because they're reptilian and cold-blooded.
Sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
And depending on how you swing it, I don't know the specific. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of biologists in the Warhammer sphere. But however the Fimir would work, the idea that their young would need a lot of magic to reach maturity, I think is a really good storyline. Dials once again into they need not only magic, but for it to be cold, and exploring how the way the world has changed has literally made it near impossible for them to exist. Where first the old one showed up, made things really hot, made things really warm. That fucked them up, where they were not adapted to this environment. And so they turned to chaos because the old ones didn't even give them a chance. And when they turned to chaos, chaos said, oh yeah, sure, we'll help you. We'll let you adapt to this new world. Here's magic. And then the magic got taken away.
Yeah, there's a whole host of potential stories that can be told here. And the background that we have is uncertain enough that they can all be told in a variety of different forms without contradicting anything, really. The initial story of the connection between the Fimir and Chaos is super weak. It's very poorly described. The war that comes afterwards, where the Fimir are clearly on the rise, is also super weak. It's like a cast out sentence here, a little description there, and very little more. And then when you find out what happens after the cataclysm, when the species goes on a massive decline, as it's clearly wiped out from many of its original home grounds, again, super weak. There's almost nothing written out there. We are just left with perhaps an individual perspective here, a cast-off sentence there, or a wide bestiary entry in, say, the Monstrous Arcanum. So we don't have a lot, but what we do have is a fascinating tale, a really interesting one, that is a species that is a homegrown Warhammer world species. It very much does exactly what it was originally intended to do, as we said back in the description, which is create something unique and new for Warhammer. And the species is that. It's a Warhammer species that has to deal with an alien invasion. Independence Day comes and they don't win. The Saurus go rampaging across the world and pretty much wipe them out. And they are then left in a poor position as the Chaos Gods eventually break through and they get their opportunity to rise. It is a lovely tale going on here with then it all getting taken away from them and the world moving on, no longer needing these things, Chaos, no longer wanting them because they failed. And the Fimir, this broken, messed up species, are left, but still with very little actual detail for us to pull apart. And I think that's something I would really like to see readdressed. Something that I think should be, and I'm hoping the old world does it because it looks like it's going to. And I hope that part of their process will be explaining what the Fimir are now, because that we don't have.
Yeah. And somebody, come on, let them lay eggs. We don't have a good, like, egg-laying species that's a civilization. It's weird. Does lizardmen just spawn? Give me an egg species.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be nice. I'd like that.
Okay, let's get caught up on super chats because we haven't done this in a hot minute.
Yeah,
Thank
totally.
y'all
And there's
for
quite a few.
enduring my tirade. Thoughts Apprentice, Baylor,
There's a good one.
Real myth should be a cruel solar entity. The Fimir both fear and respect as his evil eye curses the land, making it barren and dry. That's sexy. I like that. So
I think this is a good idea. And indeed, if I was rewriting it, Baylor for me would almost certainly be included. I might twist the name a little bit because, although I might not, but I would definitely keep the evil eye idea. That burning eye, I tie it into the Bale Fiends, okay, with the Bale Fire type idea. And they are pulling the fire out of their eye, which would also justify their use of the lore of Actuary and the lore of fire. And I would look to tie that through something that can, if you want to even add story to it, they're the ones that can guide the clan through the darkness of the mist because they've got the burning eye, the burning light. You could add that through onto the Bale Fiend side of things. And they're the priests in the original version, the Dyrachs. They were the priests, the ones who were the spiritual leaders rather than the magical or actual temporal leaders, which were the Miargs. And the Miargs were the ones who did that. So I quite like this as an idea, and I might dial into it hard if I was doing it.
Yeah, I actually really like this idea as well, because then there's like the really cool Fimir myth of like when the old ones showed up and the Fimir, they don't understand what the fuck's going on. As far as they know, suddenly Baylor just gets closer. Like Baylor's eye just gets way fucking closer to the planet.
Bigger.
Which is super fucking scary. Would have been terrifying, and a myth to justify that from the Fimir perspective would be awesome. Because the Fimir are not going to have the science knowledge to say, clearly these aliens adjusted the orbit of the planet so that we're closer. Yeah, like they wouldn't have done that.
It'd be super cool. Yeah, I think you could definitely make that work, and you could see why Baylor would become a god, and possibly even becomes a god with the drawing of the planet closer to the sun, and it's the burning heat that they begin to almost worship out of fear because they themselves are so cold-blooded in a way that a lot of cold-blooded creatures aren't. A lot of cold-blooded creatures seek out warmth. They don't. They seek out cold and wet.
Amas in Fire, the Fimir would have to have been wildly powerful magic users to dominate the arcane species in the pre-chaos world. Explains why they're how they're still around.
I'm not sure that they dominated in the pre-chaos world. They survived.
They survived, which in and of itself is impressive.
It's impressive
when
because
you know about the shit that was kicking
it
around.
was pretty terrible back then. But I think they survived, and they were a successful species back then who lived in the bogs and the marshes, but the far colder, frozen ones that you found in that period.
Nagwal, maybe I was too harsh. I've been through a lot, but I find people hiding their discomfort so obvious it's hard to believe others don't, especially when it's on trauma-inducing levels body language. Hey, you're all good. We knew what you meant. You're great. And I agree. I could say I've been in situations where I've been with a friend and I'm like, they're getting kind of quiet and stuff. And I'm like, I'll ask them about it later. And then talk to them later. And they're like, oh, dude, I was so uncomfortable. And it's like, just say something to me and we can leave.
Yeah,
Just
totally. Plus, a lot of people don't read body language. They're rubbish at it. You can't expect everyone to have the same abilities as yourself, sadly. Yeah, but yeah, we're all cool.
Yep. Yeah, especially, and I'm not saying this in like a disparaging way or whatever, but especially when you're dealing with like non-neurotypical folks, body language for them could be borderline indecipherable.
Yep, true fact.
Hammy, they hate the sun. Fimpires?
That would actually make me laugh.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Evanston Fire. I do like the implication that the Slann are Fimir, or at least maybe have some kind of relationship.
Yeah, I definitely think there could be something about the Fimir being uplifted into something, although you would feel that they would have probably been a monoocular species unless you claim that they became monoocular because of some sort of chaos influence or the deal that they made that allowed them to see chaos, become like Baelor the Sun Eye, for example, but as their eyes merge together and they become cyclopean. But... yeah, I mean, you could definitely make this argument. They're quite frog-like, I suppose, with their sort of reptilian look, but not really. It's a bit of a stretch. Yeah, it is.
Charles C.K., if Fimir are pre-old ones, maybe should be six-limbed. Well, I would say that's why you know they weren't dominant. The dominant races were six-limbed. They have five.
Charles, I think in a perfect world-building world, that's what you'd do. Something like this. If we were building the world from scratch and we didn't have all of the legacy that we're dealing with, we would probably say that the Fimir weren't actually what they were then. They maybe had six limbs, or they were uplifted and something changed, because we know that the old ones, they like their four-limbed creatures, very much like their four-limbed creatures. So yeah, I think you actually have a very strong world-building point there. And if I was writing the Fimir, I would probably want to write this into the story somehow.
That'd be fun. Maybe give them like two tails. Captain Magma,
weirdo type thing. Yeah.
Unsure if asked, but any theories on Baelor and its relationship to chaos? So if Baelor were to be uplifted and brought into the modern this is a perfect chance to say Warpstone Magazine. If you want to look at a potential what if someone had taken the Fimir and evolved them into a full faction, and what if Baelor wasn't just like an offhand mention in a sentence, but a full god? Warpstone Magazine explores that as a possibility.
Yep.
It is a fan magazine, but a lot of the people that worked on it were heavily involved. One of these people over here.
I only did a few things at the very end. I was not heavily involved.
We're heavily involved in Woofrup. So a lot of like the writers and artists and stuff had also worked on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st or 2nd edition. So it's a great book. It is fan. It's not official by any means, but there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. That is where most of the OV and Fimir mod pulled their stuff from. Was that to expand the roster, which makes sense. So it introduces like swamp demons, which are like actual demons the Fimir summon and embody into swamp-like forms, which is cool. It also does like the Shrines of Baelor, which have like a big eye on them and shoots lasers and shit. So it's pretty cool. I recommend checking it out if you want to explore that as a what if.
So that's Warpstone number 25. Notable, I think, because in there is a review for Sigmar's Heirs. Sigmar's Heirs being the good old book of the Empire for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition. And I wrote the review. It's a small thing, but I did that review all the way back when.
Yeah, it also I will also note that if Baylor were updated to modern, he would probably just be like the god of the Fimir, or maybe a demon prince, or demon princess.
Yeah, I think it's quite like be a prince. I think it's quite likely that if it got a full rework, that Baylor would just become the Hashut of the in fact, almost certainly the Hashut for the Fimir. It's almost certainly going to be the case.
I will say, if they went with the Sun God idea, I'd be fully behind it. If they didn't go with the Sun God idea, I kind of like the idea of the Fimir not really having gods anymore, because they're that level of abandoned. But there are different ways
with that too. But I really like the Sun God idea as well, because if you can imagine, if you're sitting in the bog right now, you're sitting in your own favorite bog, having a little sit down in a rather ruined building, because, you know, it's the Fimir buildings. They're all sort of ruined, craggy things. And you look up through the mist at the sun. What do you see? It's just this sort of vague, misty eye that arises in the sky. It's a perfect god, something that they fear, because they fear the sun, because the sun can do so much damage to them. I think that's a perfect place to place your Baylor. It just works within their world.
Yeah, I mean, even with the abandoned god theory, it still works really well, because the one god they do have is like hurtful
and tries to kill them. Yeah, you can build that into a really good story too.
Yeah, the Fimir are sad, man. A really sad story. And the thing I love about that is it also allows for so much explanation of why they're so cruel and deadly to deal with. And it's because they just fucking hate everything. Because everything hates them. And what can you do but lash out? MS and Fire, have either of you explored the Fimir mod for Total War Warhammer 3? Yes, I have played it. It's great. It's very good. I wish I could go back in time and redo how I had approached reviewing it, because unfortunately there were a lot of hurt feelings about the way that I tackled that. And I regret it, but, you know, it's one of those things, can't take it back. So it is what it is.
Oh, dear. There's a story there. Let's move on swiftly.
I called it not lore accurate, which is technically true, but I wish I had done a better job of explaining that that's not important, because lore accuracy is very subjective. And I did say that a lot in the review, but unfortunately it doesn't matter.
As we said earlier in the stream, sometimes we write and sometimes we do things that we wish we hadn't.
Yeah, I just wish I had used
one
different
for
language.
Sotek.
I wish I had used different language. Singemeister, how much must it suck to be the guys to bring forth and shape the Chaos Gods into the world, only for them to go, not bored, ooh, monkeys at you?
Yeah,
exactly.
I like that as a story, but I understand that Games Workshop often prefers to pitch the Chaos Gods as this immortal thing that have always been, and they came to the Warhammer world and did their thing, rather than they developed within the Warhammer world, which is very much the story that some versions of the background state. That being the case, this version, it depends on what version of the Chaos Gods they're going for. If they're saying that the Chaos Gods formed within the Warhammer world and very much came from there rather than from beyond, I love that the Fimir were the ones who were ultimately responsible. But if you're not going with that tale, and instead the Chaos Gods are this distant, almost chthonic entities that exist beyond time and space, and they found the Warhammer world and broke in during the Cataclysm. If you're going with that version, then you could twist it slightly, have the Fimirs being the first to connect with them, perhaps.
Yeah, I was saying you could have the Fimir be like the beacon, the thing that draws their attention. Kobo, I love how young Malekith makes a brief cameo in making life absolutely miserable for the Fimir, always at the scene of the crime. Yeah, he is.
Totally is. Yep, like that. And I can very much see that being a core component of many of the early, exceedingly warlike elves, where they were basically letting off steam, and the Fimir would have been on the receiving end, as would have greenskins. Basically anything that was green, elves were killing.
Yeah, it's actually, Kobo, one thing I want to say is a funny addition to this. I actually got a really big laugh out of the new High Elf Player's Guide, which for the most part, I really, really like. There's one section I have some big issues with, but for the most part, I really like. But in the history section, there's a really funny addition to Malarian's story that made me laugh, where they just randomly add that at the start of his exploration days, instead of going straight to the old world, he instead goes to Lustria and like kicks a bunch of ass up and down the coastline and establishes some elven colonies. And that just made me laugh because it's like he just shows up and kicks the shit out of people and then pisses off, and it's just very funny. Man gets around. Necromancer Kobold. In Total War, the Fimir heroes can use both shadow and fire. Yeah. Their connection to Olgu is obvious. What are your thoughts on their actually connected? It's a little weird.
But I think if you go with the Baelor option, it's not weird at all. You can absolutely justify it, particularly if you use the Baal Fiends, who are almost the priests of Baelor, if you wish to take that angle. If you do that, suddenly you can make it all make sense, because that's the fire of their god that they are manifesting. Kind of works.
Mm-hmm. MS and Fire. I like that the dark gods are disappointed rather than angry or bored. There's a story just lurking on the sidelines of the setting. Super chats, by the way. Yeah, I don't know what the super chats, by the way, but yes. Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of fun there. Especially, I think one of the things that I love about the Fimir, the Baal Fiends in particular, is that one of the things that's fun about the regular Fimir, so not the Munamim. Munamim is a very, very humanized version of the Fimir. Where she's not even bothering to like kill people anymore. But one of the things that's interesting about like the Total War Fimir that we get a lot of notes on is that like the Baal Fiends, this is talked about in Storm of Magic as well, is that it's a one-sided relationship with chaos that I love because of how tragic it is, where the Baal Fiends are using their magic and making sacrifices to the dark gods to try and tear down the barrier between reality and the ether, because they're so desperate for the dark gods to pay attention to them again, to favor them once more. They're not being guided by the god. They're literally, you can almost think of it as their children trying to get the attention of parents that don't pay attention to them anymore. They're literally trying to burn down the house just to get somebody's attention. And the gods are benefiting from it, but still completely, utterly ignoring them. There's even if you play the Tarmakon campaign for Total War Warhammer 3, one of his lieutenants is a Fimir character, a Fimir Dirac, and they make a pretty goofy. His unique title is he's the I can't remember. It's a play on Paul Atreides' title in the Dune series. The like his like yeah, it's that, but it's the Dirac something. So they make a play on it. It works really well, and there's a whole thing about the Quetzalcoatl Fimthrak. That's what it is. Thank you.
Quetzalcoatl Fimthrak.
That's his name. He's a great character. There's actually a lot of really funny lore bits about him. But there's a really interesting note about how, even though he's created purely for the Tarmakon thing, is literally just a pun on the Dune storyline, it works really well because his whole thing is that when he was born, it was prophesized that he would reestablish the connection between the Fimir and the Dark Gods. That's why he's come to Tarmakon's campaign. Is the only reason he's aiding Tarmakon is that he believes it'll be the fulfillment of his prophecy that if he aids Tarmakon with the Throne of Chaos, it will allow him to turn the Eye of the Gods back onto the Fimir and earn their favor again. And if you know anything about the Dark Gods, you know it's not going to happen because they're assholes.
No, they suck. I mean, that shows how desperate they are.
Yeah, and it's great.
Desperation.
He's one of my favorite characters Total War has created, because that is something Games Workshop would do in a heartbeat. Because I mean, they've stolen so much from Dune already. What's one more thing, right? Captain Magma, could Be'lakor have been a Fimir as they are the OG favorite child? Yeah, you could.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that there's only one thing that makes Be'lakor less likely to be one, and that's that his name is not very Celtic. It's sounding. It just doesn't sound Celtic. I mean, the addition of the apostrophe in the middle, which is generally a glottal stop. So actually, if we're pronouncing it correctly, it's actually Be'lakor. Be'lakor. But yeah, it's not a very Fimi name, but you absolutely could do that anyway.
Just remove the K and you got Baelor. There you go.
You're pretty much on it if you remove the K.
Hey man, Fimir and the Dark Gods sounds very familiar. LOL, spicy. Fimir and Dark Gods. I don't know what that's a reference to.
I feel like I missed something there.
Yeah, I feel like it's a reference to something in typical Hammond fashion. Knievel or Nivel always had canon that Be'lakor was a Fimir. Yep, that's a pretty popular one.
I think it is. I'd say there's. If I'm going to go into a bit more depth, I'd say there's two primary reasons. One is Be'lakor's model is not a Fimir or anything close to it. It is a standard bipedal humanoid.
2 eyes.
Yeah, 2 eyes. If it had 1 eye, then it wouldn't just be a headcanon, it'd 100% on. And that for me just kind of ruins it. If I was going to do Be'lakor, I wouldn't make him a Fimir because of that alone. Having said that, though, I do think that in some games I definitely do it, and I think it makes for a really good headcanon, and it also as a story makes a lot of sense because he's the first Demon Prince. So I definitely think there's a lot you could do with that.
Yeah, well, I will say, and I'm going to say this because Hugh brought it up in chat, and I want to add on to that. This could be a really good story of the Fimir sided with Be'lakor. They were part of his empire. I mean, he's the god of shadow. They are shadowy creatures. They rely on the shadows to survive. You could have it that they teamed up with Be'lakor, and that is extra reason why they got fucked when shit did not go Bellacor's way.
I would potentially even go even further. If you're going with the obvious story for Be'lakor, Be'lakor's human. Because humans are by far the obvious chaos tool. Yeah. I mean, all of the primary demon princes are human. Were human, pardon me. All of the primary characters are human. All of them pretty much are human. So Be'lakor is obviously potentially a human. And then the rise of Be'lakor, what they were capable of becoming, looking at the Fimir that don't appear to mutate much at all. How often have you seen a mutant Fimir? If any, even though they're apparently so chaos aligned. Never. So we've got an incredibly mutated, easy to mess with species in humanity. And the rise of something effectively becoming a demon from the mortal world really makes the humans pretty special to chaos. And the Fimir suddenly look much, much, much less useful. So I could see this being an entire story. The rise of Be'lakor and all of the horror that happens at the Northern Gate with Be'lakor, in many respects, takes the Chaos God's attention as they turn around and go, there's our new good guys. Yeah. These are the ones who are going to win it for us.
If you want to make
having said that, though, I prefer Be'lakor as a different species to human.
Yeah, if you want to make it extra spicy for the Fimir, you could run with the idea that Be'lakor, one of the great horrible things he did to attract the attention of chaos is that he sides with the Fimir. He betrays his fellow human and makes a deal with the Fimir. They start teaching about demons and stuff. He's bringing them sacrifices. There was a relationship there. And then Be'lakor backstabs them in classic Be'lakor fashion.
So many different ways you could do it.
Yeah. Let's see. We were here. Lidor, what should not be forgotten despite all the Fimir still live despite the old ones. The cataclysm. That I'm trying to decipher. Okay,
so there's a lot of despites there. I think you're saying that they managed to survive all the way through it, and that shouldn't be forgotten. And they did manage to reach all the way to the end times.
Yes,
and you are 100% spot on. And I do think that's worth at least taking into account. For all they are a diminished species, they're dying out. There are far fewer of them than there ever was at any point in the past. That they used to be a relatively dominant species in the world, and now they are pretty much in the periphery, in the fringes, in the coldest marshes, in the most isolated places where no other species want to go. Even though that's the only way they've managed to survive, they have still survived. And that does mean that there's definitely something that we should build into their characters to ensure that that makes sense.
Evolutionary advantages. Hell yeah. Cole Patterson, what do you think? Boglars and Fim working together now. So this is an I don't remember if this is what the Warpstone magazine did. I think it is. That the Boglars side with them. So the Boglars, I generally do not like to mix greenskins with chaos. That is not my preferred soup. So I'm still personally against this. I much prefer what Total War did, where the Boglars just joined up with the Noblars and joined the Ogre Kingdoms and came up from the swamps of the Darklands. So for me, I would run the storyline that the Fimir are a predator to the Noblars or the Boglars, of that they want the same territory. So obviously they do not get along. As opposed to, you know what I'm going to say? This falls into a trap that I try to avoid with Total War rosters. which is that a lot of people, when they're trying to fill out a roster, they'll go, oh, you know what? These two things are in the exact same environment, therefore they're friends. And I think it should usually be the opposite. When you're dealing with like civilizations or full species, where, oh, the Fimir and the Boglars want the same place, that means they're going to be fighting for resources.
I mean, it's Warhammer after all, not Ally Hammer. I actually completely agree with this. The only way that I would disagree with this is if the Boglars were not greenskins. If the Boglars were like strange Fey folk equivalents, you know, that's something you can always imagine coming from the mystical swamp somewhere, a Boglar, something that's not greenskin aligned, then I'd definitely say yank them in, mix them up, have this weird little species that works alongside them, perhaps even add demonic aspects to it. Suddenly it turns into something that works for them. But just greenskins that sit alongside, nah, I could see them occasionally being enslaved or something, but no, the Fim, no, it's just not their cup of tea.
Yeah, I could see them like being allies in certain instances. So like they work together against like an empire town or something.
Particularly if something's coming from the outside and attacking.
Yeah, but I would not put them in the same army roster.
I agree.
Kobo, Muna Mim sounds like a fascinating character. I totally get why this player and her character really ended up liking her. I was so glad she did. I have always wanted to run a campaign with Muna Mim as like the main nemesis antagonist, because I think there's a lot of fun tragedy around it. So the fact that she got used, I was like, oh no, I really don't want to kill her. And then that player fell in love with her. I was like, yes, because I didn't say anything the whole time. I just kept my mouth shut and didn't say a damn thing because I didn't want to influence any matters. But I was very, very happy about that. Plus, our party has a really fucking weird ally sitting out in the Ferdines now if we need her for something, which God help us if we do. Because my character still does not trust her at all. Necromancer Kobold, you can use so many people in the world inspiration for this, Native American, Scottish, Irish. So once again, this is one of those things, remember, to be inspired by experiences or by particular stories. Avoid your one-to-ones, because this would be that would be a bad play. But I think the idea of taking the tragedy of what it is to be faced with colonizers that are significantly more advanced than you, absolutely pull from those stories and experiences. I think for the Fimir, I think that works great.
I think there's a great story that's not yet told with the Fimir. We can imagine it, and we can almost put it together when you look between the lines, but you actually have to look between the lines because no one's written it in black and white just how awful their experience was. They just tend to just sort of go, oh, over the top, 11s and Warhammer and bad and Grims, and there's more to this story, I think.
Amazon Fire, would a Fimir matriarch be on par with a Zinch Changer, a Lord of Change, or a Salon during the Cataclysm? Also, you should catch up on Super Chats. During the Cataclysm, maybe. It's hard to say. The Fimir matriarchs are very powerful. Like the Diracs were good level 2 wizards, and their Baali gave them bonuses to magic that made them better than most level 2 wizards. So it would depend on how you interpreted the matriarchs. If it's like, oh, they're functionally a level 5 wizard because of the Baali, then yeah, during the Cataclysm, they'd be pretty fucking scary. But I don't know if that's the angle that would be taken with them. Because we don't know a lot about their casting abilities because the Mirgs are fairly mysterious. Even in the Winds of Magic book, Muna Mim is a really powerful caster, but it's 4th ed writing. So,
the stats are terrible.
Yeah, so the stats are pretty meh. So it's not a great example. I would say, because I think at the Cataclysm, when the world was suffused with magic, you could absolutely write a storyline that they were horribly powerful. But keep in mind that they were even during the Cataclysm, while they were successfully fighting against them, they were still losing against like Kaldor, Dragon Tamer, and Grimnir. Which, granted,
or winning at points as well.
Yeah, it's like, granted, those are fucking borderline demigods.
There's an issue here. And the issue is that if you go with any version of the background, the Fimir are not involved. They're just not. They're not mentioned anywhere. They're not rising up against elves. They're not doing that, although they should be. So we've got two potential answers. One is it's retconned, and the Fimir are a part of this great battle that goes on during the Cataclysm. Or alternatively, we take the route that absolutely matches the background as it currently stands, and that's that possibly Chaos have already abandoned them by this point. because they're not mentioned anywhere. They're not part of any fight. They're not at any great siege. They're not taking down the forests of Avalorn. They're not besieging any of the dwarven holds. They are nowhere, not to be found. Classic piece of Fimir writing in that Games Workshop either forgets or prefers not to even mention them. So that being the case, we have to just, for this question, make it up because we don't know the answer. I think if we were rewriting everything and making the most sense of it, they would be absolutely a core component of the Chaos Armies during the Cataclysm. But much like the Fimir, I think, should always be, they're not the big part. And by that, I mean, there's just not that many of them in the greater scheme of things. There's clans all over the world, but there's not that many of them. The pure magic ones are exceedingly rare also. There's basically the one matriarch for each one of the clans who sits over them all, and lesser priests, they're Dyrachs that sit underneath them, who are much lesser by comparison. So if we were doing that, then absolutely on par with some of the best magic users in the world, because there's so few of them, and that makes them super fun and exciting. The Slann outnumber them at this point by a significant measure, because there's quite a lot of them during the Cataclysm. They get wiped out at the beginning and throughout the course of that battle, but at this point, there's still quite a number of them. And the Matriarchs, I think, would make a lovely foil on the other side, a very different type of Chaos Sorcerer, but it currently doesn't really have an answer.
Yep. And also, you should catch up with Super Chats. We're working on it.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Kevin, do you think Fimir omelets taste good? Don't know if they have eggs yet, but
assuming they even have them.
Sure. Kevin, what race do you think makes the best meat butter?
Oh, God, did you have to bring that up?
Meat butter. I mean, if Goldfag Maneater is to be believed, as he's an expert on the subject, apparently halflings.
Oh, man, yeah.
You heard it, folks. Sotek's waifu is Muna Mim. Listen. I am legit doing a waifu stream this week. Though it's got husbandos and waifus on it for a lot of Warhammer characters. It's going to be a stupid, very late Valentine's stream. Not even in February anymore. But I can't remember if she's on the list, but if she is, you better fucking believe she's going to be SRA rank.
And because it's got a grav sitting off to the side, it's actually Monamim.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, because I know with that is
I think that's how I pronounced it the first time, and then somebody in my comments was like, "No, it's Muna," and I was like,
Mona.
"Oh, okay."
Monamim.
Yeah,
it says O as a sound.
I don't know why I ever believed the fucking comments.
It's all kind of interesting.
Watch. That would be that could work, honestly, because Solkan is an angry motherfucker.
Yeah, Solkan, Stroke. I mean, you could definitely do something with that. Sul as a god, as he's known in Southern Empire. Yeah, you could definitely do something with that.
I mean, he is literally the textbook definition of hateful sun god.
Yeah, definitely something in there.
Yeah, that would be an interesting twist. Sign of the Emperor. Perhaps they have some immunity or ability to manipulate fungi and spores in some way, given how much of an issue that is for cold-blooded creatures generally. Warm bloods are almost totally immune due compared to body temperature, because of body temperature. Yeah, that's an angle you could absolutely explore.
And equally, it's an angle that you can explore on the other side, where it's a problem for them with disease. And it's also a problem for them when they perhaps mix with boglards, which gives you a good reason not to have them close by, because they are fungal creatures by nature. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that could be approached, and you could get some really nasty diseases that potentially runs through them. Something I definitely want to steer into, because why give them advantages to get over their disadvantages all the time?
Yeah, give them another reason to hate greenskins, just like they hate everybody.
Yeah.
Ricky Chapman, our Wolfrope campaign blog, the Fimir was the favorite NPC amongst the PCs. One of the best moments was a chaos wedding with blog and a fallen Shukengun PC. What the fuck is this campaign, Chapman?
Ricky, that sounds mental. Love it.
What in the absolute hell were y'all doing? Oh, okay.
I love it.
Yeah, that's great. I have so many questions that we don't have time to answer. Hammond, so like the dwarfs, the situation of the Fimir is an open and hash it case.
Oh, gods!
Get the fuck out. Jesus Christ. Sign of the Emperor. If they manipulate fungi through magic, perhaps they have a special way. So a slave greenskins kind of fodder and extra manpower. How would this affect the relationship between them? Would orcs hate Fimir or fear? So there are a lot of different ways you could do it. Generally speaking, greenskins have a very negative relationship with anything that attempts to control them. This gets repeated a lot
Yeah.
Forces try to manipulate greenskins or control them, and it usually blows up in your face. So in this sense, if you wanted to run with this direction, that's not what I would do, but if you wanted to do this, I would say that, yeah, that would make greenskins absolutely fucking hate them. They lose their orkiness or their greenskinness if they get too close to the Fimir. Which could be, something interesting. Czar94, for the stream, I knew next to nothing about the Fimir. They're interesting. Yeah, that's the word I'll go with. Interesting.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, that's a very apt description. Hammond, the Chaos Gods came in and balored out on them.
Last one was better.
Yeah, it was. Captain Magma, Be'lakor and Balor as dual gods of the Fimir, that darkness versus sun dynamic could make some interesting sense. You could do that where there are different obviously different clans might have different takes and religions and stuff.
And I think that might actually be a better way of doing it. It's all too easy to turn species like Fimir or indeed any others into monocultures, where you say, we've made up this one version of them and we're now going to copy paste that to all of them across the world, where people aren't like that. Things aren't like that. Everybody builds up their own beliefs according to their local environments, according to the things that endanger them, according to the things that are useful to them. So each of these clans would have their own individual, let's say, not necessarily gods per se, but most certainly traditions. And there would be lots of different variations. Now, if there is one god that is responsible for them in the same way Hashut is tied directly through to, for example, the Chaos Dwarves, or Morgur with the Beastmen, maybe it's Balor with the Fimir, then absolutely that would be something that would be applied to them across the world and all the clans, but there would still be a whole host of extra stuff on top of that that would be really nice to investigate in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I think you could definitely have some strengths of like the Fimir of Albion, for instance, seeing Be'lakor as an entity that was abandoned like they were, and they kind of see him as like a manifestation of their experience and worship him. Or you have some that live in what used to be part of his empire in the old world, and they still see him as a god back when he was practically a living god. So yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics you can do there. Singemeister, a lot of plague bearers are one-eyed.
Yeah, they are.
Of cyclopean themes.
Yeah, I remember thinking this a long time ago, thinking there potentially could be a link there, and I don't think that that's still to this day necessarily a bad idea, although Nurgle's rot is noted for turning you into a Cyclops. So the rot that grows within you basically pulls your eyes together in a pussy mess, which is pretty horrible. And that's definitely a thing, and they do look similar. Could you turn that into a thing? Yeah. Would I? Probably not.
Yeah, I would. If I were going to explore this, I would do it in the northern cold mires where the toad dragons come from.
Yeah,
which are the big Nurgle monsters. So you could have a story in that particular bog.
You could even have a really horrible spawning pool variation there, where the local Fimir are being effectively created to make a local variant of the plague bearers, but they are mortal rather than being demonic. They're demonically influenced, obviously, but then you get living ones.
A disease that if you catch it, it makes your eyes start going together and you turn into a Fimir, but like they're a horrible plague body horror way.
That'd be fun. Yeah, there's definitely something in that too.
I mean, we have to remember that Be'lakor isn't his true name, so he could have easily have been a Fimir originally just as much as a human or elf. He intentionally hides his origins and may be ashamed of his Fimir origins now.
Or maybe it is his true name. We can say, oh, it isn't, and he could even claim that it's not, but it doesn't mean it's not. After all, this is the name that he's carried almost since the beginning. Now, when you become an ascended being, your true name is effectively what you are. It describes you as much as anything else, and arguably that's what Be'lakor is, but it's arguably not. He's been worshipped underneath this name from the beginning, which suggests it's a name that he's had for a long time. It could easily be his.
Yeah. There's also an interesting, I think there's a storyline you could run that could be very interesting about Be'lakor being so A, powerful, but B, arrogant that he actually has his true name on display.
You'd have to be careful with that, though.
Yeah. But yeah. I don't think that would be the case, but that is a story I could see someone running with. Koba, of course, Prince M randomly showed up in Malarian randomly showed up in Lustria to beat the shit out of lizards, establish an elven colony, and promptly leave. Classic. Yep, it really is. Though I think it actually mentions that when he was in Lustria, he was slaughtering greenskins. Because he was fighting against all the savage tribes and forest goblins. Because Halor came over to our world. His name is Ted Cruz.
I don't even want to think about real world politics just now.
Yeah, I hate him significantly more. Rocker Boy Jukebox, off topic for Andy. Think you can share your experiences running Cyberpunk 2020 one of these days? As a CPK 2020 GM myself, I yearn for thy wisdom, Chew.
I haven't played Cyberpunk actually as a GM for a long time. I did it a lot in my teens and a little bit in my early 20s, but I haven't played it for a good 20 years. So most of my memories would be that memories. But I would probably have quite a lot to say because
you should. You should.
I might consider that.
In the Lawhammer Discord, and maybe get a friend going on that.
I might consider doing that.
Hendrik Verbeek, Mona Mim, dreaming of life beyond the bog.
And just moaning in general.
Yeah, just moaning in general, yeah. So, yeah. But, oh man, we actually got caught up. Good. Because we're Jonathan's manservant, thank you very much for the 23 months, by the way. Yes, we're caught up. Thank God. Because that was
way! I didn't know we were ever going to make it before the end of the stream.
Barely. So
anything else you'd like to cover film-wise, given that we only have a few minutes left?
We got one last topic with them, which I find interesting, which is their actual culture as far as like construction and crafting.
Go for it.
Because there's some interesting things there. So the Fimir, rather hilariously, are noted as being very poor constructors, architects, not their strong suit. All of their towers are described as like forbidding black stone fortresses that lean and sink into the marsh. Granted, they do live in a bog, so like building there is probably already a bit of a bitch. But they build like little huts and things out of what materials they can have. But working with anything more, let's say, structurally integral than like just reeds and woven grasses is a problem because it sinks. So often the Fimir rely on either their ramshackle leaning blackstone fortresses, or a lot of the time they move into ruins.
Wow.
Yeah. That's literally a phrase I read one of the stories. It was like, that's an interesting choice of words. But the Fimir often inhabit ruins, either from people they've taken out, or often they just find a human settlement that's been abandoned, and they go, yep, we're going to move in here, and then start conjuring the mist to obfuscate and hide themselves. Yeah, everyone says I was daft to build a castle in the swamp. Or, man, there are a number of places in the U.S. that have a very funny set of stories where they would build something and it'd sink, and then they'd build another thing on top of it that also sank, and then they built the third one, and that one stayed up. It was built on top of the other two. That's happened many times in the U.S. history. But anyway, when it comes to their actual technology, one of the things that's interesting about the Fimir is that they seem very like almost I don't want to say barbaric, but they seem very like low tech until you get to their weapons. Their weapons are weird, and it's because the Fimir are really fucking gifted with magic. Fimir weaponry is typically like a form of like brass, bronze, easy to meld metals, but they make them really big, hard types of like maces, and then they enchant them. And the enchantments of the Fimir got expanded on in mostly the Forge World book, and they made them fucking terrifying. Fimir death runes do not give a fuck about your armor. They are going to splat your ass. It talks about their runes are so heavily drenched in magic that just cleaves apart anything it strikes, and that even though they are quite powerful monstrous infantry themselves, when they go up against someone like a fully covered knight in armor, they can literally just go, that fucker's dead, because it tears people apart, which is fascinating. That when you look at like their construction abilities or a lot of aspects of their almost kind of like shamanistic cultures, you would expect them to like steal their weapons like a lot of beastmen do, or use demon sorcery like the chaos source and stuff do. No, they use a form of like runic script that is incredibly potent, which is really interesting.
It is. I agree. It's there's not much there. Again, not much like most Fimir backstory, it's a few dropped rules, a few little bits of extras. But in this particular instance, it speaks to their society as well, where magic is a core component of how things work. It shows how strong the matriarch is and how strong, presumably, the Bale Fiends or your Dyrachs are also in terms of their society as a whole. Magic is a core component of the Fimir's existence. They work their society around it. They use it to build the magic mists that are about them all the time, that also protect them from the environments that they choose to live in, which they are not safe because of the sun that sits just beyond the edges of their mists. So yeah, we've got a magical species that uses relatively primitive equipment that aren't so technologically advanced, but are very magically advanced. And they use their magics to effectively fill up and paste over the holes that they have on the technology side. But they do build all their own equipment and their own dodgy houses. And yes, they also inhabit ruins. Some of the original descriptions for them often had them inhabiting their own ruins from when their species was at its height. And now they live in the ruins of where they used to live. So old halls that were once very important to the Fim of old have now become collapsed, sunken, askew buildings that they now eke out in existence in the middle of the bogs and the marshes, which is also quite fun. Living in the memories of their old buildings. A little bit like green-skinned dwarfs.
Yeah, which to answer this question, there are a lot of kinds of runes in fantasy.
Yeah,
Dwarf runes are a very specific type of rune, but
elves have got their own rune magic. Dwarfs have got their own rune magic. Humans have their own rune magic and have done since the early days of Warhammer. You had all manner of runes that humans used to put on all their weapons. And you think, wait, no, they don't. Just take a look at half of the weapons that you see various wizards carrying. They're covered in runes. They're covered in special magical sigils. And these are just a standard component of enchantment in the Warhammer world. So runes aren't that special. It's just dwarves can only manifest their magic through runes. And they're pretty good at it.
Yeah. Because when you're forced to only use a single method of doing something, you tend to perfect that one particular method. The last thing I'll say about the Fimir is this is something we kind of glossed over a little bit, but I do want to focus on for just a moment, which is, of course, that the Fimir have an almost insectoid-like aspect to them, which is their caste system.
Yeah.
Where that Fimir are born into a caste. It's not like a civilization where you're born and because of like who your dad is, you get slotted into a certain societal role, but there's not actually any differences between the lot of you. Biologically, the castes are very unique.
Yep.
Where the Shurls are the kind of like they're the
workers.
Worker class, they're
slaves.
The drones.
They're the drones.
Yeah, and they're noted as being treated about as badly as slaves. They're not treated well by other Fimir.
Yeah, and it's worth noting though that this is a species where it's not so much that they're slaves per se. It's just what they are. In the same way that worker ants are workers, they are drones. They are the basic Fimir. They're the ones that wander around and do everything: the building, the forging, the everything. They are the ones that get stuff.
Yep, and then you get up to the Fianna or the Fim. The Fim are biologically very different. They're swollen with muscle. They've got these back shells coming out of their back, almost like a turtle shell that is like super duper hard and resistant to damage. Their tails have big clubs at the end of them.
Ankylosaurus.
Yeah, they're physiologically designed for combat, almost kind of like Saurus are physiologically designed for combat, but they're born that way. They're born with a role in mind as they emerge from whatever the hell they're born out of. The Dyrachs have smooth tails. They don't have anything like that. They have the Bale Eye, which means they're able to see and manipulate the winds of magic. They're born immediately with the role that they are meant to fulfill. And then you have your Fianna, which are the nobles.
They're the leaders.
Who are bigger and badder. And they tend to have big scythe tails.
You're black orcs.
Yeah, they tend to have big scythe tails. A lot of the art will have them with spikes, or it's like a big cleaver, like a crescent moon shape that just blades and slices through people.
As I recall, it was originally described as a halberd of all things when it was going through its original descriptions. I think that's what Graham said. That's, however, going back.
I believe that's correct if I remember the White Dwarf 102 correctly. I think that's how it's described.
Oh, there you go.
And then the Mirgs also have smooth tails. Which is hilarious because if you go back to White Dwarf 102, there's a funny scene about Mother Skaha, which is also a really fun character, which she talks to all the Fimir like they're her children, and they call her Mother, which I'm always like, Graham, I feel like you're saying that she gave birth to them, which I would much prefer than the other shit that you wrote in that other book. I feel like this is much better. But there's a funny scene where she's like
their mother, just in a different way.
Not in my headcanon, but there's a pretty funny scene of her moving around a room ranting, and her tail keeps slapping the other Fimir as she turns very violently. And the Fimir, Graham literally gives a head thought of the Fimir being like, "Oh, thank God she doesn't have a bladed tail. We'd all be dead by now," which is just very funny. She now what's interesting about the matriarchs to me is that they've evolved a lot since Graham's original writing, because in Graham's original writing, they're about the same size as other Fimir. And later writings, they got big. Like, they're really big. If you go read the Sigmar trilogy, for instance, by Graham McNeil, there's a Fimir that shows up, and they're not monstrous infantry size. They're big ladies. We're talking like towering over other Fimir. And the later you get into Warhammer Fantasy, kind of the bigger they get. Where, like, if you go look at like Throg the Troll King compared to a regular troll, that tends to be seemingly what you are often dealing with when you're dealing with like a matriarch versus a regular Fimir warrior, where they're like a good head plus over. I wouldn't describe them as truly monstrous sized, but I would describe them as very fucking big. Which is an interesting development.
Yeah, it's an interesting and one that's inconsistent. So who knows whether they'll eventually land on it. Yeah, the Dirach also generally always depicted with like big thorny, horny things sticking out of them as well. And that's managed to come all the way through down onto the Balefiend artwork as well, where they still have that slightly horny look popping up for it, though the Mirgas didn't have that to begin with. They just had like hoods that sat over their heads.
I actually want to, just for funsies, I want to pull
up hag witches.
Very, very recently, a piece of art, or oops, I need to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this.
I'm interested to see what he's bringing up.
Yeah, so this is the Mirg I was talking about earlier. That was made by a guy on Reddit. So he took the Ushoran model.
Holy crap.
And kit bashed it into her. And it looks amazing. She looks so good. And look how big she is. Like, those are the Forge World Fianna Femme in front, which are the big monstrous infantry warrior class. And she is huge. I love this design. That's a big lady.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, no, they've won me over with that one. Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, so also the super interesting thing about Mirgs very specifically, which I would actually say this is an argument that you could have live birth if you wanted for the Fimir, is that Fimir matriarchs, even back to their original design, have hair.
Yeah.
They're the only Fimir that have hair, which is really, all other Fimir are bald. But
it's because they're dialing up on the hag witch type idea, which was very much the inspiration for what they were. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll show off is, if anyone hasn't ever seen Muna Mim before, I'll bring up a piece of art, or her one piece of art, if you would like to see it. So this is what Muna Mim looks like.
Yeah, I'm not so happy with the scaliness of it. It made it look a little bit too lizardman for my eyes. I don't think Sam nailed it the way I would have liked.
That's fair. I do like the horns and the hair, though. That's perfect.
Yep, that's okay.
And she's a sad big lady.
She certainly is.
All right, let's
let's grab our last super chats before we head towards saying goodbye.
Hammond, Andy now plays Cyberpunk 2060.
Holy crap, I'm getting old. Let's just, I remember when it was 2020, and 2020 was the far future. Holy crap.
Yeah, that's over half a decade ago now.
I don't want shh. half a decade. Surely
There's
it can't be
Death
20,
Runes,
20,
anything to do with Fimir Death Quest. Oh, I'm actually glad you brought up Death Quest. No, when I say Death Runes, I don't mean like literal Death Runes, but like runes that bring death.
Death, yeah.
But the Death Quest is actually a great thing to bring up, which is that the Fimir, once again, very interesting about the matriarch, and I still feel like this is another big supporting thing of I really don't like the idea that they need humans to reproduce, because it doesn't make sense when you look at the evidence of that. And this is back in OG Fimir. This is like original. This isn't something that was added later. If the matriarch dies, the clan dies. They just die. There is no possibility of them surviving. Because when the matriarch dies, the clan goes on a death quest. And sometimes if a Fimir noble like fucks up or pisses off a matriarch, they might get sent on a death quest. But what it is it's exactly what it sounds like. The Fimir get together, whoever it is that's going, and they march in a direction and they fight until they die. There is no. It's almost
for a big fight.
Yeah. It's almost kind of like a Slayer's Doom in a sense, but without like I'm trying to get honor. But there is no turning back. There's no way out of it. If your Fimir matriarch dies, the Diracs will come with you. Like everybody gets together. And you march off and you fight until you die. Because to me, what's interesting is that if the Mirgs were not giving birth, if they were not laying eggs, if they were not spawning young, why do they need human women?
It was magic.
But the Diracs can use magic.
Yeah, but they couldn't use the full magic. The Diracs were priests in their original intention. They were
like a sack of hammers real fast.
Yeah,
they turned into wizards really quick.
It was ritualized sacrifice, for want of a nice way of putting it. That the mother would observe and be effectively the overseer of, and yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, so
but without her, it all falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, even in the White Dwarf book, or the White Dwarf 102, the Fimir Diracs are just wizards.
Yeah,
like they turned into wizards really fast.
Real fast, yeah, totally.
So I will say, look at that.
That's because you got to remember, it's that because there was no priest rules in Warhammer.
Interesting.
They just didn't exist, so all priests were wizards in Warhammer. So they got turned into wizards for the Warhammer equivalent, because there was no equivalent for priesty rules.
Mm-hmm. Necromancer Kobold. I find it interesting that they also use slave labor and soldiers in the Shurls, but the Shurls are better dressed and equipped than most slaves. And well, it's because they're not. Debatably,
they're not strictly slaves. They're just the lower caste.
Yeah, it's always noted that they're not called slaves. It just says they're treated about as badly as slaves.
Yeah,
where
totally.
their deaths don't really matter, and they're sort of kind of thrown at problems, because they're drones. Just like how an ant colony doesn't really give a shit about if the smallest die. Like, who cares? Super Orlok, Fimir ranked by size like orcs or humans in 40k. That is a way you could look at it when it comes to fighting, at least. Captain Magma, what if Mother Ostenka is a rogue Fimir that shape changed to look more humanoid and take advantage of the cold, dark atmosphere of Kislev? That is
definitely an angle you could take.
Yeah, that's a lot. You could, I guess, if you feel hell bent, but you could. Anyway,
okay, we done. Time for a quick conclusion. All right, Fimir. I really like the Fimir. I have always really liked the Fimir. The problematic aspects of the Fimir, which we have discussed at length, and I'm not going to go back into. I didn't even realize that much as a kid, much like Graham didn't when he first wrote it, because we saw it as the mythical entities that they were, and we kind of used them like that in our games. They were the horrific fiend that lay beyond the horizon. But the more that they were examined, the more it became clear that their unfortunate aspects were problematic. Now, in a perfect world, they would have been written well in the beginning, and the problematic aspects of them would be incorporated as a core component of what they are in a way that makes everyone go, oh my god, they're awful. But we understand that they are awful within an awful world, and this is how to use them. But that didn't happen. And that means that we are left with a species that I think Sotek has done a very good job of trying to justify as not being parasitically attached to the human species in order to create their kids. He is desperately trying to say that the Fimir are more and better than that. And I think that's something that Games Workshop has to do. Because we have got a super cool, unique Warhammer species. The goal at the very beginning that Brian Ansell set them off towards was to create something that was unique and Warhammer. And they did. There wasn't really anything like it. And yes, they just copy-pasted a piece of art from Alan Lee into Warhammer. They took the idea of the Fomorians from Irish legend and they added some extra bits from elsewhere, whether it's the Cúnal Trow from Northern Scottish legend or whatever. But they created something new out of that. And the Fimir are a rare example in the Warhammer world of something that is actually pretty unique. And the more you dive into it, they've actually also got a really unique story for Warhammer 2, where they are one of the indigenous species of the Warhammer world, and one that turned to chaos possibly out of desperation, or possibly even creating the seeds of what chaos would become through their early, rather primitive worship. They could be the ones who are responsible for blowing up the entire Warhammer world in the end, and that's also a potentially cool story. They potentially rose to have an empire of sorts that spanned the world. There was definitely clans of them all over the place. They were definitely doing something during the Cataclysm. Again, not poorly described. But beyond that, afterwards, we have an incredibly sad tale of this species that have been abandoned, both by Games Workshop, and whilst they pop up here or there, they have been abandoned largely, and also by their gods. So there is a beautiful tale that can be told there of the aching loneliness of these poor, lost, forgotten monsters in the bog, the demons of the mist, truly terrifying creatures that lie beyond, that are possibly pitiful and pathetic, but also tremendously scary, and, depending on how you build them as miniatures, potentially really big. I mean, really big, according to that one that we just saw pictured, which was pretty cool. And that, for me, means that the Fimir, from my perspective at least, should be updated. And this is basically my challenge to Games Workshop. Do it, and do it properly. And either confirm that they are horrific entities, and this is a part of your world, or firmly change it, because you can't carry on like this. Constantly writing around it empowers people who want to use them towards bad ends. But writing them maturely, if they are as dark and as evil as we have suggested they could be through the course of this stream, if they are that and they are tackled maturely, it also defangs those who try to use them as a tool of power. So Games Workshop needs to do this properly. They have a responsibility because they created them and they're theirs, and they never got rid of them. And they are still sitting on the periphery, ready to come out of the mist and potentially return in the old world. And if they just write around this problem one more time, we are so fucking streaming about that, and we are going to call them out, because it is absolutely unacceptable to not tackle what they actually are, because they have got a dark history that either needs to be confirmed or denied.
Yeah, and the last couple things that I just want to add real quick is that based on all the reading that I did leading up to this stream, I feel really confident that the parasitic interpretation of the Fimir no longer makes sense with their more modern writings, where you have characters like Muna Mim, her clan is dead, and she has no way to resurrect them or bring them back, despite the fact that she's a matriarch, and there are lots of humans hanging around. So if a matriarch is the part of the process, then she should be able to do it. Then we have things like Death Quests, where if the matriarch dies, the entire clan dies, which, once again, they have magic, there are plenty of humans, they should be able to get around that. There are a lot of aspects of their nature that I don't really think make sense, and I think exploring their relationship with magic is a better story. But I do want to bring up, I think, a really good comment by Grackle, which is that if you're going to keep the parasitic angle, and GW wants to keep it, they should be like the xenomorphs, where it doesn't matter who they get. It doesn't matter if they get men or women, as long as they're humans.
I actually agree with this. This was part of the conversation that was held over on the Lawhammer Discord about them. And the idea was it shouldn't just be the targeting of women. It should be the targeting of people, the targeting of mortals, because they themselves are something that are a bit beyond, a bit more magical, a bit more scary, a bit more beyond. And I think that would work really well. It would make them horrific. And I kind of like that. After all, we don't call out aliens for being problematic, even though they are a standing metaphor for sexual assault. And that's exactly what they're supposed to be, and that's good. And having that sort of media to discuss and work around these things is generally a good thing. But again, if we are discussing on the roleplay side, we have to be mature in how it's presented.
Let us men have some fear too, damn it!
Oh, damn it! Now let's catch our last super chats before we dial off, because there's a couple there.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is that if you do go the parasitic route, I also think the responsible thing to do is to detail how it works, whether it's like a ritual or a tadpole or whatever. Don't let it be the vague mystery, because that's where the frankly rapey stuff comes from.
Yeah, it is absolutely where it comes from.
If you're gonna get in the weeds, get in the fucking weeds.
Yeah.
Ricky Chapman, our Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay campaign is nuts. A Chaos Lord, a Fallen Shukengun, who's apparently married to a Fimir, a Chaos Ogre, a Dancer from End, and a Mad Wizard before the end times. That is the most hilarious,
sounds awesome,
bad shit Chaos campaign party I've ever heard. Chaos campaigns of Wolfrup are super fun if you can find a group to run it with. That's
I've run a few in my time. It's always good.
Crap Ballots, thank you so much for the thought-provoking Lorebeards podcast series. Been binging you for a week now. Oh, well, thank you. We are glad to hear that. By the way, I will update the podcast and the whatever you call it, the podcast website version.
Podcast site. Yeah.
I will update that in the playlist. That's what I meant to say earlier. Nils Andre, thanks for the stream. Just wanted to say hey. Well, thank you. And that's it. So
thanks all. That was a good one. I'll admit it was a topic that I had a certain amount of trepidation towards, but that's because of my own history with the topic. But I think we covered it pretty well. I think we did go into the weeds in a few places, and we took our time with it, meaning that as your super chats piled up, we were still going on. But I think it came out pretty well by the end.
Yeah, I'm pleased. I agree with Andy. I was always a little nervous about this one because there were things we had to talk about, but I feel good about where we ended up. Okay. I see a lot of people bitching about it. What about the bog octopus?
We'll do that in a bog octopus stream.
Yeah, we'll do a bog octopus thing because there are a couple of bog octopi I really want to talk about because they're hilarious in the sewers down where you poop. But
is this what we're doing next week? I'd forgotten.
Yes, help it is next Sunday.
That's a nice way to end. I'd forgotten that we were doing that.
Yeah, that being said, bog octopi, if Fimir were ever a full range, they would obviously have a bog octopus as one of their monsters. They'd have to. It's in the bog. Just up there with the finworm. Finworms were cool. Do Fimir have any cattle monsters? Not really.
Not really. But I definitely think if you're expanding them fully, we would be having a full bog examination.
Oh, okay. What about Kroll? So Kroll is purely from the Warpstone magazine. Kroll does not exist in any other material. So he's purely a fan-made thing. He's not canonical. There is nothing. Like, Baylor gets mentioned in the old stuff. Kroll is completely made up.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, that wraps us up. This Wednesday, we're doing something. Over on the
after
Lawhammer,
I think we're on my channel next time. Yes. Lawhammer this Wednesday and Hell Pit next Sunday on Lawhammer. Hell Pit, oh yeah,
it's gonna be a super good time. We're gonna have please gaming shenanigans. Lawhammer this Friday. Rookery.
It's this Friday is the Guns of Nuln. What's happening in the south?
Oh, when are we going back to main story? I want to know what happens.
The week after.
Okay. And then we have, even though what happened in Reichland was super fucked. That
was a thing.
Yeah. The opening, it's like, we're doing Inglorious Bastards, okay?
Good times. That was quite fun, though.
Yeah, that was a fun watch. And then Saturday, Rookery, do you know who you're having on this week?
I do. I just can't remember.
There you go. Someone will show up on Rookery
somewhere. You can all find out. It's I forget. We had we just had Mike on, didn't we?
Yes, for Trench Crusade.
For Trench Crusade, yeah, that was good. Anyway, I'll post an ad up for it so you can all see.
Okay, anyway, we're out of here. Thank you all so much for watching. Please take care and good night. Bye.
See you
Whatever.
later. Bye-bye.
See you later.